Chapter 2099. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The Sword of Slaughter. After the divine tribulation of Nirvana in the Seamless World and the Sky Wheel, the divine would contain some spatial Tao intent. It wouldn't affect the sword Tao of a sword cultivator. However, the heavenly wheel that Wu Kei forged after crossing the God Tribulation was incomparably pure. Not a single strand of space Tao was mixed into it. At that time, even Qin Hao found it strange. Logically speaking, Wu Kei had ascended to the God realm with the help of the heavenly Tao of the seamless divine domain. Furthermore, he had the help of the divine master who operated the power of the great world. No matter how pure his sword soul was, it should have been tainted with some space energy. However, Wuk didn't. He didn't contain any spatial Tao intent. He only had the unique sword force. The music stopped, and the sky wheel disappeared. The sword cultivators who were controlled by the music gradually regained control of their souls. Their bodies fell from the sky one after another. Everyone was sweating profusely. At this time, countless eyes looked up at the sky. On the sky wheel, where Tian Slayer was, a beam of golden sword light emitted a blinding light. Threads of sword current surrounded Wuk's body. It was him who had crossed the sky wheel's music domain and defeated Master Tian Yin's disciple. He had saved everyone from the terrifying music. Retreat. A Rikujinji sword cultivator shouted. He nodded at Wuk with a serious look. Thus, the sword cultivators of the three realms dragged their injured bodies out of the Sky Wheel training hall and stood under the statue to rest. Although they didn't know Wuk's strength, and many of them hadn't even heard of his name, the fact that Wuk could break through the Sky Wheel's music domain and charge in front of Tian Slayer was enough to prove that this young man covered in golden sword current was far stronger than everyone else. Wuk stood on the Sky Wheel platform. Although his back was facing the crowd, he could clearly sense the anticipation in everyone's eyes. The sword cultivators hoped that he could defeat the immortal realm. Interesting. Heaven's Bane looked at his palm. There was a dark red spot of blood on his palm. He brushed it with his ring finger and touched it. Sticky blood streaks flowed out. It was ridiculous that there was a sword cultivator in this sword realm who could injure him. He had not been injured for a long time. Even the monstrous geniuses in the Yunzhe divine realm would find it difficult to injure him. Wuk, that's a good name. The power of the sword you release is different from that of the group of trash below. I hope you can let me experience the joy of battle that I haven't felt in a long time. Heaven's Demise gave Wuk a look of praise. Her 5 slender fingers flicked at the strings on the divine zither. Whoosh! There was the sound of air being torn apart. Beams of light shot out in a straight line, solidifying midway and turning into a rain of arrows that drowned Wuk. The blood on his palm made Tian Shang understand that this swordsman who was covered in golden sword streams had a very special sword intent. It did not seem to contain any impurities and was very sharp. It might have something to do with a life spirit, an extremely rare life spirit in the primordial world. Whoosh! The sword current around Wuk's body started to flow rapidly, and a dense patch of golden sword shadows appeared at his position. They became more and more turbulent, as if they had turned into a storm of sword chi. When the densely packed zither sound arrows shot over and were trapped in the golden storm, they all shattered. Tian Shan's expression was calm. He was not surprised at all. His fingers plucked at the zither strings in an orderly manner. As the music intertwined, an invisibly vast pressure brewed. It slowly pushed forward for where he was sitting. Although there was no divine light, it gave off an extremely strong sense of oppression. Wuk slowly closed his eyes. The sword chi storm around him roared angrily as the clanging of sharp swords resounded in his ears. He had come from the divine wilderness continent. During his cultivation journey, he had seen many talents skilled in the great Tao of music, such as Changhe Lo, Mo Xian, and Ning Tianxing. Back when he was cultivating in the Divine Palace, he had privately sparred with the disciples of Yaoguang Peak. He was the same as Qin Hao. In fact, he did not know much about the great Tao of music. However, they were skilled in their own abilities. Only by magnifying their abilities infinitely and firmly guarding their souls could they be unaffected by the sound arts. At that moment, Wuck's ears were filled with the sound of swords. His body was filled with sword chi. Countless divine swords flew through his consciousness. Everything he had was a sword. Rumble, rumble. A terrifying, crushing sound gradually assaulted him. As the sound spread out, countless terrifying cracks appeared on the rooftop. It was as though it was being swept up by a raging tide. The pressure gradually enveloped Wuck, trapping him. At that moment, looking up from the training hall, Loi and Li Guangxing could clearly see that the intense musical notes had transformed into a vast ocean. It was as though an invisible wave had set off tens of thousands of layers. Wave after wave crashed heavily onto Wuck's body. The sound waves roared, and the golden storm became smaller and smaller. It was as though it had sunk into the deep sea. Tian Zhongkong did not seem to be prepared to crush Wuck directly. He seemed to be enjoying the process. Wuck closed his eyes. The sound arts that were surging from all directions were crushing him. The sword will that he had released showed signs of being unable to withstand it. He knew that his foundation was weak and that he was no match for Tian Zhongkong in terms of divine power. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The storm shrank. As the dazzling lotus of the great Tao bloomed beneath him, bunches of golden petals wrapped around Wuck's legs and began to form a sword cocoon. Then, the golden sword cocoon broke through the air. It bore the heavy pressure of the sound waves and attempted to break through from the bottom of the sea. Will the same trick work? Tian Zhongkong smiled silently. His eyes seemed to be admiring an object as he watched Wuck struggle in the sound waves. The moment the sword cocoon formed, he raised his arm and slammed it heavily on the divine Guqin. Buzz! A transparent palm print fell from the sky above the platform. It covered the entire area and slammed directly into the sound waves, hitting the swaying golden light cocoon. Wuck! Li Guangxing clenched his fists and shouted. His heart was in his throat. The disciples of the academy were all nervous. The people of the divine land of Yunzhe were too strong. With the current situation, it would be extremely difficult for Wuck to withstand this attack. Sword abandonment calamity. Wuck said silently. The dangerous sword move that he had not used for a long time exploded from his sword spirit. The first two moves of the calamity of the three swords of Death Shadow were one attack and one defense. But this last move was a desperate move. It was like a cicada shedding its shell. If he did not win, the risk was extremely high. So when Wuck fought with others, he would not use this move. The only time he used it was at sunset peak. Now, facing the pressure from Tian Zhongkong, he, who was weak in cultivation, had to take the risk. Pull! A faint golden light flew out. The terrible piercing power ignored the crushing sound waves of the deep sea and flew out of the golden sword cocoon. At this moment, the golden cocoon shone with a brilliant light. There seemed to be a special ultimacy in it, and it began to devour the sound waves. Boom! With a deafening explosion, the palm print from the sky pressed down and blasted the golden cocoon that had swallowed the music into powder. There was no longer a trace of golden light in the field. But at this moment, a terrible light appeared in Tian Zhongkong's eyes. He widened his eyes in disbelief. He seemed to see a figure in the faint light. It was the swordsman who was trapped in the sound waves. How can it be? Tian Zhongkong did not understand. Would the same move work? Wuck used his actions to tell him that it worked. Pucci! A sword flew past. Tian Zhongkong's black hair floated from his temples to his shoulders. A finger-length wound appeared on his face. Blood flowed from the wound and covered half of his face. His entire body was trembling, and his originally handsome facial features were distorted. He slowly turned his head and looked at Flawless, who had pierced through him with his sword. He, who was originally full of ridicule, seemed to have gone insane, and his eyes were filled with thick blood vessels. Boom! His hand pressed heavily on the divine zither. Tian Zhongkong's body flew up and rushed towards Wuck. Along the way, his fingers danced on the zither. Rays of terrifying light flew towards the back of Wuk's neck like spinning scythes. As expected, I am still lacking when facing an opponent with great talent. Streams of blood flowed down from the corner of Wuk's mouth. The meridians in his body contracted, and a painful spasm appeared in his body. Even though he had stabbed Heavenly Slayer, the palm that had struck the sword cocoon had been withstood by his main body. When the cicada returned to its shell, the pain swept over him like a flood. He had already suffered heavy injuries. "Wuk, be careful!" Loy shouted. The guy playing the zither seemed to have gone crazy. He had been angered by Wuk's sword. Wuk naturally knew the killing intent coming from behind him. Unfortunately, the abandoned sword Calamity had used up all his sword energy. He did not have the strength to move. He needed to use the heavenly wheel to draw energy back from the heavenly Tao. It would only take a moment. But Tian Zhongkong would not give him the chance. Dong dong dong. Like a drum, a barrage of attacks struck the body of a black-clothed youth. Extreme frost permeated Tiantai. This was not ice energy, but a cold created by pure, killing energy. Flawless only felt that there was a sturdy body firmly stuck to his back, taking on the powerful attacks for him. With every beat of the drum, both of them would spit out a mouthful of blood at the same time. But they held on. Tian Zhongkong panted several times, as if venting his hatred, venting the anger he had suppressed in his chest. Finally, his zither music stopped. But the scene of Wuk being smashed to pieces did not occur as Tian Zhongkong had imagined. Another person had appeared in front of him. Rikujinji Mujan would like to exchange pointers with good sir. The defeated Feng Xiao. Mujan wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth as he resolutely stared at the personal disciple of Heavenly Sound God Lord. At the same time, another silhouette appeared behind Mujan. Wu Kei stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Each of them held a divine sword in their hands. Golden light and black light interweaved. The atmosphere on the rooftop was filled with raging swords. The aura of the sword. "Even without you, I can still hold on," Wuk said coldly. "But we can't let the seamless world and true dragon world take all the limelight, can we?" Mujan said in dissatisfaction. Long Mo and Huang Dao were in the middle of an earth-shattering battle. He originally wanted to meet Tian Zhongkong, but in the end, Wuk beat him to it. "But I still have to thank you." Between Wuk's eyebrows, a sacred sword emblem slowly emerged. As the power of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor spread out and flowed through his body, his temperament underwent an obvious change. The surging golden sword light began to gradually fade and turned into invisible sword chi. The aura he emitted also became more and more dangerous. "This fellow seems very unusual. If we take him down, the two of us will probably become famous." A pair of wings wrapped in black energy slowly unfurled on Mujan's back, looking like the claws of the Grim Reaper. "No, just me." After saying this, Wuk vanished. It wasn't a special sword technique or divine skill, but the third sword soul between his brows that had changed his sword Tao. Chapter 2100. 114 Chinese Network Primordial Alchemy Venerable. Chapter 2100. Return Heavenly Slayer Lost. Up until now, Tianshang had not revealed the grade of his heavenly wheel or his attainment in divine patterns. He had only relied on his divine power to suppress the sword cultivators of the three realms. One could only imagine how terrifying his refinement of the divine path was. It was impossible for Wuk to defeat him. The difference between the two of them was too great. On the other hand, Mujan had barged into the battle at the most critical moment, paying the price of being injured to take on Heavenly Slayer's attack for Wuk. Wuk was against it because he knew that the sword wound on Qin Hao's chest was caused by Mujan. He would definitely get his revenge. However, Mujan's thoughts were correct. If they were sincere in joining forces, they would have a chance of winning against Calamity. Wuk's gratitude was justified. At this moment, as the sword insignia appeared on his forehead, Zhuiying Heavenly Emperor's sword spirit bestowed upon Wuk a brand new characteristic. It concealed his sword aura and even made him disappear. He immediately charged forward and attacked Heavenly Slayer for the second time. Mujan flapped his black, slaughtering wings, his body floating in the air above the rooftop. Under his wings, an extremely cold, slaughtering sword chi swept out, covering the sky and covering the earth. The surging sword chi flew over, and the killing intent seemed to freeze the space. The divine Guqin was erected beside Heavenly Slayer. His right hand plucked the strings skillfully. Divine power flowed along the strings of the divine Guqin. Above his head was a vigorous sound domain. Looking from the floating glass palace, the falling black sword streams were blocked by layers of chaotic sound waves. The sword lights exploded densely. At this moment, a formless sword intent blasted out from Heavenly Slayer. The force it carried was extremely powerful. Although he could not see it, he could clearly sense that the strand of danger was rapidly approaching. It was faintly mixed with the power of the Way of the Heavens. Bang! Heavenly Slayer plucked the strings with his right hand and rolled up his left sleeve. He clenched his fist and punched out. A beam of terrifying divine light seemed to have collided with something midway. Immediately, the rooftop rolled and shook. Small rocks fell from the cracks of the stone pillars. The rooftop seemed to be on the verge of collapsing in a fierce battle between the three. Being hit by the shock wave from the front, Heavenly Slayer's body tilted slightly and he staggered backwards a few times. His right hand froze, and the sound of his zither was cut short. In an instant, Mujan's slaughter, sword energy, came down from the top of his head. The storm-like black light engulfed his position and exploded into a cloud of dust. Slayer. Countless sword cultivators below were cheering excitedly. Wu Kei and Mujan's cooperation seemed to have a miraculous effect. This was the first time Heavenly Slayer had been forced to retreat from a direct attack. Perhaps they could really win. A maniacal laughter burst out from the smoke and dust. A figure in tattered clothes suddenly rushed out, holding a cracked divine zither in his hand. He pounced in front of Mujan and heavily smashed the top of his head. Crack! When he was done speaking, the divine light of the heaven wheel exploded from Mujan's body. The bone-chilling divine power of slaughter filled his wings and invaded Tian Casualty's body. It flowed into his will, his blood, and even his soul. At the same time, the pitch-black sword of slaughter in his hand slashed towards Tian Casualty's head without holding back. Mujan. Mu Bai's heart trembled as he watched from below. Mujan wanted to use himself as a shackle to trap the people of God Realm Yunzhe to death. But even if he succeeded, Mujan would definitely suffer immeasurable injuries and even pay with his life. At this moment, Wuk's body appeared. Just now, the sword chi he released clashed head-on with Heavenly Slayer. Although he managed to push back Heavenly Slayer and cut off the sound of the zither, he himself was in great pain. His body felt like it was being torn apart. He raised his head and saw Mujan engulfing his opponent with his massacre divine energy. He had already trapped Heavenly Slayer, and all he needed to do was strike and defeat Heavenly Note God, Lord's disciple. But if they really attacked, Mujan might also be seriously injured. I'll return Li Chuji's sword to you. Come at me. Mujan shouted with all his might. The pitch-black sword of slaughter was already close to Heavenly Slayer's head, as if it would split it in half in the next moment. A disdainful smile hung on Tian Casualty's face. He raised his hand and grabbed the sword. When the light of slaughter came into contact with his hand, no matter how strong Tian Casualty's divine power was, his hand was still covered in wounds from the sharp sword chi. His hand was covered in blood. You think you can defeat me with just the two of you? Tian Casualty gripped Mujan's sword tightly, ignoring the wounds on his hand as he savagely smiled. His left hand smashed into Mujan's chest, and the berserk energy he had tempered over and over again caused Mujan's heavenly wheel to violently sway and dim. A second punch followed, then a third. Banging sounds rang out incessantly, and with each punch, Mujan's body was like a falling leaf in a gale, ready to be torn to pieces at any moment. So what if it was an immortal-grade heavenly wheel? He couldn't even remember how many immortal-grade or divine-grade experts had died at Tian Casualty's hands. He was Heavenly Note, God Lord's strongest disciple, so he couldn't possibly be defeated by two sword cultivators. Don't. By the time the last punch was unleashed, Mujan's consciousness had long since faded away, and the hands holding the sword of slaughter powerlessly drooped down. Looking behind his collapsed chest, one could see a terrifying bulge protruding from his back. It seemed like his bones had been deformed and were about to pierce out of his back. But the wings wrapped around Heavenly Slayer were still extremely sturdy. Even though his heavenly wheel had been shattered and his consciousness had fallen unconscious, they still firmly held Heavenly Slayer, as if waiting for Wuck's next attack. Borrow the sword from the heavens. Wuck completed the gathering of power while hesitating and couldn't bear to look up. He told himself that Mujan's fate was indeed like this, and that he owed Qin how a sword attack. Wang. The unparalleled sword light form from the heavenly Tao's momentum pierced through the sky platform. At this moment, the sword energy of the three realms contained in the heavenly Tao of floating glass madly converged on the sword light, causing it to emit an extremely divine light. Tian Casualty felt the great Tao's sword momentum coming from behind him, and his heart trembled violently. He knew that Wuck's sword soul was very special, possessing terrifying piercing power. It was a rarely seen sword soul in the untainted land. Once it pierced through, given Tian Casualty's current situation, it might seriously injure him. That was definitely an outcome that Heavenly Note God Lord and Tamanaji didn't want to see, as it concerned the dignity of the divine realm of Yunzhe. Tian Casualty wanted to dodge, but he couldn't move. He couldn't even turn his body and switch places with Mujan in front of him. His blood flowed slowly, and the divine power in his meridians was affected by the slaughter sword intent pouring into his body. His thoughts were a little slow, and even though he knew that danger was approaching, his body couldn't react in time. He could only watch. Pucci. The huge sword light sank into Tian Casualty's back, and a hoarse scream came from the void. Then, the attack that contained the sword energy of the three realms pierced through Tian Casualty's body along with Mujan's. Only then did the pair of wings that tightly wrapped around Tian Casualty slowly loosen, and the two figures fell heavily from the sky at the same time. You didn't disgrace the name of the Rikujinji sword cultivator, Lucio said. The blood in his body was boiling, and his clenched fists were trembling slightly. Quickly bring Mujan back. After seeing Mujan fall, Mubai slid down the tilted roof and fell straight to the ground from a height of 10,000 feet. In an instant, a few Heavenly Wheel experts of the Mu clan rushed to the scene and brought back Mujan, who had fainted from the exhaustion of his divine power. Did you win? On the Academy's side, Weijia said in a daze. Now, only Wuck was left standing on a ruined roof. Tian Casualty seemed to have no strength to fight anymore. No, Li Guangxing seemed to have sensed something, and his expression changed drastically. Clap, clap, clap. Rhythmic applause sounded from his side, as if praising and encouraging. Tian Casualty, who had fallen on the roof, turned into a beam of light and flew towards the source of the applause, disappearing into a figure. That was a good move. If it wasn't for your special sword spirit that made me feel threatened, perhaps the person on the ground would be me. What a pity. There was a hint of mockery in the pity. Tian Casualty's voice sounded, and Wuck immediately turned around. He found that Tian Casualty was unharmed. There were no holes on his body caused by Borrow's sword from the heavens. Even the hand that was holding Mujan's slaughter sword didn't have any wounds. Doppelganger. Wuck gritted his teeth. Tian Casualty, who had fallen to the ground, was a puppet formed by the musical divine technique. The one in front of him was the real body. Mujan had risked his life to fight for this opportunity, but it only allowed Wuck to defeat one of Tian Casualty's doppelgangers. It was simply terrifying. Now, only you and I are left here. I've wasted a lot of time, and I've gradually lost interest in you. It's time to end this. Tian Casualty raised his hand above his head, and a layer of dazzling heavenly wheel of the great path appeared on his body. The dazzling brilliance set him off like a majestic god. The powerful divine aura caused the floating glass heavenly path to tremble uneasily. Celestial level 2 divine glyphs. Wu Kei watched silently. In his eyes, Heavenly Slayer's palm swung down, and a terrifying divine light engulfed him. Musical notes filled the air. Boom! A terrible collapse sounded from the floating glass dojo. Under one attack, one of the 3 towering rooftops was completely destroyed. Along with the shouts of Loi, Li Guangxing, and the others, Sword God Severing Love stepped forward, ready to jump into the battle and save Wuk. Just as Severing Love was about to step forward, his eyebrows twitched. Something's not right. But at this time, in the dust, the towering rooftop was replaced by an illusory pavilion. Hundreds of millions of sword chi flew in the sky above the floating glass dojo, and they kept drilling into the pavilion, and the sharp sound of swords rang out. Astonished faces stared at the pavilion. Inside, Wuk sat in the air, as though he was sitting on the ground. In front of him, billions of sword chi were flying back and forth towards Heavenly Slayer. Blood flowed down Heavenly Slayer's body. He roared furiously and blasted out terrifying palm lights towards the sky as though he had gone mad. He wanted to destroy the billions of sword chi. However, the more he did so, the more sword chi appeared from the pavilion. The speed at which he destroyed the sword chi was much slower than the speed at which the sword chi was being produced. That is, the sword pavilion of the academy. Weijia and the others were shocked beyond words, and their minds were blank. Wuk, this guy, actually moved the sword pavilion of the academy into the floating glass dojo? That is not the sword pavilion, but it is better than the sword pavilion. It seems that Wuk has completely grasped the essence of the Skywheel Sword Will. Tian Casualty will lose, the blind Sword Venerable said quietly. After hearing this, Sword Venerable Gu and the others nodded, without any doubt. When the Sword God King died, the remaining sword will turn into the 3 sword realms. The swordsmen of Avicii obtained a bone of the Sword God King by chance and discovered the ancient void illusion. Therefore, they built the academy. Everything in the academy was derived from the essence of the ancient void illusion. It was the ultimate meaning of the sword way and represented the peak of the ancient sword way. In this world, no person or sword could be stronger than the Sword God King, at least not yet. Therefore, the blind Sword Venerable was sure that Tian Casualty in the divine realm of Yunza would lose. Chapter 2101. Wooling Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Chapter 2101. Invincible the perfect level. If Tian Shang wanted to win this battle, he would have to surpass his master's understanding of the divine Tao Heavenly Wheel and reach a level that not even Heavenly Sound God Lord could reach, the same level as Sacred King Yunzhe. After all, the sword pavilion Wuk had created with his sword intent was at the God King level, and the 2 sides were no longer on the same level. The majestic pavilion was suffused with the divine radiance of the great Tao, and countless sword chi crisscrossed within. The ear-piercing sounds of swords violently stimulated Tian Shang's soul, and these sharp sounds seemed to be extremely lethal to him. They destroyed his foundation of the divine Tao and interfered with his divine sense, making it impossible for him to use his normal strength. He was like a wild beast trapped in a metal cage, and as someone next to him used a sledgehammer to strike the bars, the sounds almost drove him crazy. If you had not thought yourself clever and used your clone, I might not have been able to win this battle. But your zither sounds have told me that an item is just an item. No matter how strong it is, it does not have the wisdom of a human, nor does it have the innate humanity of a human. It is just an item in someone else's hands that silently abides by the rules and has simple thoughts. Wuk sat in the air like an old monk in meditation, sword splendor emanating from his body. No one understood the meaning behind his words, except for the lofty heavenly sound God Lord. Kill, kill, kill. Tian Shang's eyes were deep red, and his crazed face roared out the word kill 3 times. He was immersed in the chaos of the swords, and had completely lost his mind. His attacks were no longer methodical, and he instinctively wanted to destroy everything in front of him. A zither soul appeared on Tian Shang's body, overlapping with his heavenly wheel. As the 10,000 swords flew, it was as if the zither was Tian Shang himself, and the zither strings vibrated wildly due to his loss of control. Strands of silver zither strings flew out of Heavenly Slayer's body and shot towards the pavilion. More and more strings appeared, filling the entire sword pavilion. They pierced through the flying sword chi and targeted Wuk, turning into a silver tide that swept towards him. Wuk sat there calmly. Wave after wave of sword power fell from the pavilion, ceaselessly. The swishing sound of the sword power completely drowned out the sound of the zither strings. As the sacred light bloomed, beams of light condensed from sword power wriggled like veins, covering every inch of Wuk's body. Every single strand of his hair and pores were shrouded in the sword power. At this moment, the entire floating glass field was silent, as if time had frozen. Crash! God Lu, the Dragon Lord, Jun Mo, Temenaji, Fenwei, and God Lord Tianyin all stood up from their divine thrones, their expressions drastically changing. But no matter how their expressions changed, there was no exception. Their eyes were all filled with shock, though the degree of shock varied. Only Sword God Avicii remained seated as if he had long ago known that this would happen. He had even taken the time to admire the expressions of the other God Lords. Perfect level. God Lord Fenwei pressed his hands against the armrests of his divine throne, his back hunched. This half-sitting posture, coupled with the expression on his face, vividly displayed the shock in his heart. God Lord Tianyin took in a deep breath and slammed back into his chair. He knew that Heavenly Slayer was bound to lose this battle. There would be no more miracles. Jun Mo glanced at the three God Lords of the Sword World, his shock gradually returning to him. He softly smiled and said, "So the Sword World still has some capable people. This is rather surprising." A perfect level heavenly wheel was not something that could be ignored, not even the faction of a God King. It was a symbol, a natural chasm that separated the ants beneath it. In Junmo's view, there were only two types of heavenly wheels, perfect and imperfect. There was no such thing as a great heavenly wheel, a small heavenly wheel, or an immortal-grade heavenly wheel. If one wanted to become a God King, a perfect heavenly wheel was an essential innate condition. But this did not mean that every cultivator of the primordial era who could forge a perfect heavenly wheel would be lucky enough to become a God King. Thus, Jun Mo was only mildly surprised. After all, the primordial realm where he came from had quite a few perfect geniuses, and not all of those people had the same extraordinary potential as him to become a God King. Boom! The silver tide that swept over stopped in front of Wuk. It was like a huge wave that could not be suppressed no matter what. Then, the sword chi flew past, and the huge wave was cut in half. The suppressive power of Wuk's perfect heavenly wheel caused Qianzhan to fall into a state of madness. He could not look directly at the dazzling light. He hugged his head with both hands and howled violently. The silver zither threads that pierced through his body also began to rapidly shrink until they withered. After fighting for so long, I suddenly discovered that my opponent is just an object with a simple mind. This has made me lose all my fun. It's time to end this. Wuk's sword finger slowly rose to the top of his head. Inspired by his will, the billions of sword chi in the sword pavilion exploded with terrifying divine light. The great Tao in the outside world resonated. The entire sword pavilion solidified, as if it had become a divine sword that could hold up the sky. Boom! An unparalleled explosion spread through the void. Strands of sword chi swam out from the explosion and disappeared into the floating glass heavenly way. These strands of sword chi contained the sword intent of the three realms. Under the control of Wuk's perfect heavenly wheel, they had now returned to the will of the heavenly way. As the dazzling light slowly dissipated, the sword pavilion disappeared. Two figures floated in the air. It was Wuk and the heavily injured Qianzhan. Tianjin raised his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood was mixed with silver threads, like countless broken zither strings. Tianjin fell straight off the stage. After falling to the ground, he began to convulse in pain. His body became more and more unreal. In his hazy state, he seemed to transform into the illusion of a broken zither. Wuk lowered his head and glanced indifferently at Tianjin. He knew that this was not a person, but a zither that had been infected by divine intent and had taken the form of a human. It was just like the Flower Emperor in the Heaven Lake of Kunlun. Tianjin had listened to the Divine Lord of Heavenly Sounds preaching, and her divine intent had surged into the zither when she played the zither, allowing Tianjin to take the form of a human. But in essence, he was a zither that could be manipulated by others. He did not have many complex thoughts, if not for the fact that Wuk had seen through him and used his sword intent to form a sword pavilion to trap him. Using billions of sword tunes to distort Tianjin's zither spirit, it would have been far too difficult to win this battle. You, Tianjin lay on the ground, pointing painfully at Wuk, who floated above his head. He could not believe that he had been defeated by a sword cultivator from the lower realms. He was Lord of Heavenly Sound Zither and was familiar with thousands of musical scores. He understood all of his master's thoughts. As long as Lord of Heavenly Sound's fingers pressed on the zither strings, Tianjin would be able to instantly sense her emotions. But that was all. He understood Lord of Heavenly Sound, but he did not understand Wuk. Trash will always be trash. It looks like there's no need for you to be a human. Lord of Heavenly Sound's cold and emotionless voice came from the floating glass palace. Master, no. Give me another chance. Give me another chance. Tianjin begged loudly. He struggled to crawl toward Lord of Heavenly Sound, and then a sound wave swept out from the floating glass palace. Bang! Tianjin's begging came to an abrupt end. His raised arm stopped midway. His body began to shatter, pierced by the sharp divine light, until he became a zither riddled with holes. But he could no longer return to Lord of Heavenly Sound side and would never be able to play a zither for his master. He's actually not a human. This, countless people were shocked. Weijia and the others could not believe their eyes. The Yunzhe divine realm monster who had suppressed the sword cultivators of the three realms, who had single-handedly prevented 100 heavenly wheel experts from taking even half a step on a Tiantai, was actually an inanimate object. Everything has a spirit. It listened to your zither music and gave birth to a divine sense. It has accompanied your excellency for countless years, and after 20,000 years, it finally managed to transform into a human. Why must your excellency be so cold-blooded? Divine Lord of Ichi looked at Lord of Heavenly Sound and said emotionally, the many disciples of the Academy won against my zither. Could it be that your excellency thinks you can teach me? Lord of Heavenly Sound coldly replied. When Divine Lord of Ichi saw this, he did not say anything more. He only felt pity for Tianjin. They were both spiritual beings, and Tianjin was essentially similar to Loi. The only difference was that the methods of the two Divine Lords were different. Divine Lord of Ichi gave Loi more humanity. He treated Loi as his real daughter. But Lord of Heavenly Sound showed no mercy to Tianjin, destroying him without hesitation. Mubai! Wuk stood in the air and shouted at the area below God Lu's statue. Mujan should pay for his sword, but you haven't paid for your sword. Sword Pavilion was originally a coffin I prepared for you, but you carelessly let a broken zither bear it. Remember this well, the matter of the broken world is not over. This shout reverberated, causing Mubai's expression to wildly change. After witnessing Wuk's strength with his own eyes, how could he not be on tenterhooks? If he asked himself honestly, although Tianjin was a zither that had transformed into a human, Mubai was not Tianjin's match, let alone defeat Wuk. Mubai's mouth twitched, and he laughed bitterly in his heart. He was the grand young master of the Mu clan with 20,000 years of cultivation. Now, he was being challenged by a sword cultivator who had just become a god, yet he did not dare to respond. It was truly ironic. But he also knew that from today onwards, Wuk would grow more and more terrifying. After all, The perfect Tianlun was enough to take away all the glory from Mubai. Even Lucio might not be as strong as Wuck in the future. After shouting, Wuck silently floated towards the Academy's team. The moment he landed, his legs went soft and his body lost all strength. He almost fell into the crowd. Fortunately, Li Guangxing and Wei Zhi caught him. "Kid, are you all right?" Severing Love came up and asked. Wuck's face was extremely tired, and he shook his head. Maintaining Sword Pavilion's divine intent is still too difficult. In such a short time, I've used up all my strength. Ha ha ha! Everyone burst into laughter. Many of the Academy's disciples hugged Wuck with tears in their eyes. This battle was extremely thrilling, but at the same time, it also brought them a huge surprise. Qin Xiaohe sat beside Zine and silently looked at Wuck. She nodded at him, feeling extremely proud. Now, Wuck's growth was about to surpass hers. Wuck smiled and shifted his gaze towards Qin Hao's seat. He found that the seat was already empty, and Qin Hao and Xiao Han were nowhere to be seen. He left, Wuck murmured. He had retrieved a sword for Qin Hao, but unfortunately, Qin Hao did not see it. This guy, why did he leave in such a hurry? Did Qin Hao really have something to do, or was he afraid of something? Chapter 2102 114 Chinese Network Translator Endless Fantasy Translation Editor Endless Fantasy Translation Translator Endless Fantasy Translation Editor Endless Fantasy Translation The courage of the dragon race under normal circumstances. Wuck would not have been able to defeat Heavenly Casualty. Apart from some special factors, Wuck's extraordinary sword intent had also played a crucial role. Just how many people in the Divine Way in the past 20,000 years could withstand that majestic sword pavilion and the boundless sword intent within? Very, very few. As for those with the same cultivation foundation, there was no need to even think about it. They would definitely be insta-killed by Wuck. Compared to his extraordinary sword intent, the perfect Heaven's Wheel was even more shocking. Even Jun Mo and Tamanaji were moved by it. However, they did not take it to heart. There were many first-rate monstrous geniuses who could forge perfect Heaven's Wheels in the God King factions. They had long since become accustomed to it. They just did not expect one to appear in the sword world. As for the sword cultivators of the three realms, they were far more shocked than Jun Mo and Tamanaji. If it were not for the fact that the occasion was inappropriate, it would definitely have caused a huge commotion in the floating glass field. However, the battle was not over yet. Following Heavenly Casualty's defeat, Long Miao and Huang Dao's battle had reached its climax. The outcome was about to be decided. At this moment, countless pairs of eyes looked towards the sky. Long Miao and Huang Dao's figures were nowhere to be seen on the rooftop. Their battle had erupted even further away, hidden in the clouds. Over there, beams of extremely powerful fist light tore through the great path. The terrifying roar of a dragon resounded through the clouds. In their line of sight, two surging balls of light separated and merged, then separated again. Every time they collided, it was as if a world-destroying heavenly thunder was reverberating above their heads. Long Miao and Huang Dao's battle entered its most violent state from the moment they clashed. Neither of them was willing to show any weakness. Bang! For palms clashed. Long Miao and Huang Dao's fingers were tightly clasped together. The two of them constantly swapped positions. Terrifying divine light and draconic chi radiated from their bodies as they wildly clashed against each other. "Sir, you are much stronger than the defeated Dragon Prince." Huang Dao smiled, purposely emphasizing the word defeated. Long Miao and Huang Dao's fingers were locked together. Long Miao's eyes were cold and indifferent. He was not affected at all. A strong dragon tail appeared behind him and lashed out at Huang Dao's body. A dragon tail swing sent Huang Dao flying thousands of feet away, shaking his internal organs. "Go!" Long Miao waved his sleeve, and a sharp sword light flew out. Along the way, a dragon roared and the sword light turned into a divine dragon. Its sharp claws were like swords as it clawed at Huang Dao's head. Huang Dao endured the roiling blood in his throat. His eyes became more and more frightening. His arms were completely covered in intense divine light. It was as if he had put on a layer of armor. He roared and punched out. It turned into thousands of fist shadows, all of which landed on the dragon's body. Seeing this, Long Miao performed his sword art. The dragon that was hit by the fist shadows suddenly split into two, two into three, and three into 10,000 dragons. They landed in the area where Huang Dao was and surrounded him like layers of iron barrels. Then, the 10,000 dragons flew up and turned into sword chi that filled the sky and pierced into Huang Dao. The sword will had turned into a dragon. The transformation of the dragon and the sword will had stunned many of the powerful figures of the sword world. Rikujinji was especially shocked. When Lucio saw this, he could not help but secretly praise him. Although the true dragon world specialized in sword power, Long Miao's attainments in sword were also extremely impressive. It was no wonder that the Dragon King thought highly of him and called him the most talented prince. Bang! Thousands of sword shadows stabbed at the same spot. Dozens of surging sword chi waves were created. The clouds high in the sky were washed away. Then, Long Miao's dragon sword returned to his hand. He stared at the center of the waves. He knew very well that this level of suppression was not enough to crush Huang Dao. As expected, when the waves dissipated, Huang Dao's figure was revealed. His eyes were still arrogant and unharmed. However, there was an additional set of shining armor on his body. It was the armor that had helped Huang Dao block Long Miao's sword chi. Heavenly punishment, Huang Dao said solemnly. His body slowly rose up. He rose even higher and stood above Long Miao's head. At this moment, the dazzling divine light of the heavenly wheel bloomed on his divine armor. Strands of divine patterns that contained terrifying fists will circled around his body. He raised his fist high and smashed it down with all his might. It was as if a divine hammer had descended from the heavens. With a boom, the shockwave that tore apart the heavens was sent out. Countless twisted rays of light shot down from the shockwave and swallowed Long Min. Seeing this, Jun Mo smiled. Forcing Huang Dao to use heavenly punishment was enough to prove that this prince was extraordinary. At least, Jun Mo had never heard of anyone in the Fun Wei divinity who could withstand the power of heavenly punishment. Long Mian squinted his eyes and raised his head to look at the descending rays of light sweeping towards him. Within the rays of light, there was an extremely violent divine, might fist intent, and at this moment Huang Dao's aura was also very different. There seemed to be a strange power flowing in his body that could greatly increase the destructive power of the fist intent. This attack should be Huang Dao's strongest attack. At this time, Long Miao put his palms together and slowly moved them in front of him. Strands of golden dragon will snaked around his robe like countless dragons swimming around. Just as the heavenly punishment was about to hit him, Long Miao let out an earth-shattering roar. The raging Gang Chi turned into a storm between his palms and shot up into the sky, with countless dragons flying inside. Boom! Crack! Beams of violent light shot into the storm and pierced through it. The holes and cracks grew bigger and bigger. Huang Dao's fist will began to destroy the true dragon roar. Countless rays of light even swept onto Long Miao's body. At the same time, the true dragon roar also destroyed Huang Dao's heavenly punishment. The countless dragons in the storm swallowed the rays of light. Both sides had pushed their heavenly wheels to the limit and kept moving forward. Just like in their previous battle, neither of them was willing to back down, because both of them knew that if one of them was slightly weaker, they would definitely lose. Bang! The astral wind tornado finally struck Huang Dao's body. In that instant, endless dragon roars reverberated in his mind. His divine soul was filled with terrifying dragon shadows that wanted to tear him apart. Gradually, cracks appeared on the divine armor that enveloped Huang Dao's body. Countless sturdy scales fell off rapidly. There were even dragon shadows that drilled out from Huang Dao's body. More and more of them appeared, causing Huang Dao to let out an unbearable and hoarse cry. Puff! Blood dripped from the corner of Long Miao's mouth. At this moment, dense dragon scales were shining under his robe. The flesh of the dragon tribe was naturally strong and had a unique advantage. His dragon scales were comparable to rare divine weapons in the untainted land. Even so, he was still injured by Huang Dao's fist will. Long Miao sneered and used his sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. He shook his body and turned back into a dragon. A golden dragon covered in golden light twisted its huge body and flew across the void. It opened its claws and stepped on Huang Dao's head. Huang Dao was hit by the true dragon's howl, and his consciousness was in a mess. His Tianluan was affected by the dragon's will, and his body was still filled with the dragon's law. When he saw the dragons will transform into its original form, the dragon's eyes that looked down on everything made Huang Dao experience fear for the first time. In the face of danger, he couldn't care less about the dragon's shadow in the Tianluan. He shouted and punched the dragon's claws. This violent force made Long Miao's dragon body stop for a second. His dragon arm was shattered, but his other forelimb was still firmly on Huang Dao's head. Huang Dao howled like an ant under the dragon's claws. He couldn't help but be carried away by Long Miao. Along the way, golden dragon breaths kept attacking Huang Dao, shattering his armor and cracking his divine body. The divine blood dyed Huang Dao red. Pung! The dragon claws grabbed Huang Dao's head and pressed it on the platform. Long Miao stepped on the platform and stepped on Huang Dao's head. He let out a domineering dragon roar, as if he was announcing his victory to the world. In the next instant, the sky platform gradually cracked. Long Mo stepped on the ecliptic and crushed the 10,000 feet arena that was reinforced by the many powerful figures in the sword world, smashing his opponent heavily onto the Dao field. A pair of scarlet dragon eyes looked down at the ecliptic beneath his feet as he spoke in human language. "Are you very strong?" Huang Dao's face was covered in a bloody mist, and his body was in tatters. At this moment, his aura was extremely weak, and even with all his strength, he could barely open one eye. He looked up at the divine dragon that was stepping on him, and his mouth slowly opened to reveal a sorrowful smile. He had lost this battle. Disappointing thing. God Lord Fervor's face was extremely ugly. In contrast, God Lord Long Ao was laughing like a flower. The dragon head, which was already frightening, laughed even more frighteningly. He said, "Haha, my son is brave. Spare his worthless life." Bang! Long Miao lifted Huang Dao and threw him into the floating glass palace, where he landed at God Lord Fenway's feet. Immediately, a few Heaven Wheel experts stepped out from behind God Lord Fenway's throne and hurriedly carried Huang Dao back. All sorts of elixirs that nourished the divine soul and divine body were fed to him. Huang Dao was different from Heavenly Slayer. Heavenly Slayer was God Lord Fenway's zither, and there was more than one zither. However, Huang Dao was God Lord Fenway's successor, the only successor among his many personal disciples. Huang Dao's character and hobbies were very similar to God Lord Fenway's. He treated God Lord Fenway like his own son and could not lose him. Well fought. Prince Long Miao is mighty. The sword cultivators of the three realms raised their arms and cheered. Huang Dao was extremely arrogant, but he was defeated by Long Miao. The battle between the two made everyone's blood boil. Long Miao, congratulations. However, I have to say that Huang Dao committed a grave mistake. He was too confident in his physical body and dared to fight against a dragon. To be honest, he was a little stupid. Lu Qiu went up to congratulate him. Long Miao transformed back into his human form. He was also covered in blood and only had one arm left. He had not won this battle easily. Hearing Lu Qiu's words, Long Miao rolled his eyes at him. "Sixth brother, are your injuries serious?" Long Yu and the other princes went up, their eyes red. "I'm fine." "Fourth brother, that bastard deserved a beating. If it weren't for the fact that today was a training ground and father personally gave the order, I would have torn him apart." Long Miao glanced at his missing arm. This injury was nothing. After the sword battle, he could use his divine power to reconstruct it. As long as his divine soul was not destroyed, his divine source would not be destroyed. Even if his entire physical body was destroyed, Tianluan would not die. A mere arm was nothing. Tamanaji glanced at Long Miao and smiled at the several divine lords. The three great sword realms are truly filled with talents. Today, my horizons have been broadened. Your Highness Yu is too kind. Divine Lord Fenway's disciple is also extremely outstanding. He defeated many sword cultivators of the three realms and even defeated one of Dragon Lord's princes, Divine Lord Immortal said politely. He glanced at Divine Lord Heavenly Note beside him. Of course, Divine Lord Heavenly Note's zither is also quite powerful. A zither that had gained enlightenment had caused the three realms to lose face and nearly lost the dignity of the sword realm. Chapter 2103. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Princess of the Sword. It wasn't easy to win the two battles. In order to kick Ecliptic Path and Calamity out of the floating glass arena, the sword cultivators of the three realms paid a heavy price. After this battle, Muzhan fainted, Wuk used up all his sword intent, and even Long Miao lost an arm. Meanwhile, Yunzi Divine Realm and Tianzhao Divine Realm only sent 2 people, and they were from their subordinate Divine Lord forces. From this, one could see how terrifying the Divine King forces were. They had even more monstrous geniuses than Ecliptic Path and Calamity. The Dragon Clan can win because of their strong physique, which is an innate advantage. In the process of fighting with the Ecliptic Dao, the actual sword Dao that they can use is very limited. Junimo was obviously not convinced. If they were to compete with swordsmanship alone, the sword world was actually not worthy of its reputation. Long Miao might not win. A win is a win. What's with all the nonsense? If you want to see the sword Dao, why don't the 2 of us go up and spar? God Lord Long Ao said provocatively. He was afraid that Junimo wouldn't dare. Junmo's mouth twitched, and he looked at the floating glass arena, ignoring Divine Lord Long Ao. He was only a Divine Lord, and Long Ao had cultivated for tens of thousands of years. No matter how talented Junimo was, he would definitely be crushed by Long Ao if he went up against him. Long Ao would be able to crush him with his cultivation. Moreover, Junimo had yet to reach the Divine Master Realm, so he naturally couldn't fight against an old dragon. Continue. God Lu was in a good mood, and he felt the world in front of him was peaceful. At this moment, God Lord Avicii slowly stood up and took a few steps forward. He looked at the dilapidated training hall with his hands behind his back. His gaze stopped at the only well-preserved rooftop, and he said softly, God Lu, let Luo, Yi, and Lucio go up. Junimo and Tamanaji's arrival affected the progress of the sword battle of the three realms, and it sped up the battle. Whether it was the battle with Ecliptic Path or the battle with Sword World, they had already seen the results they wanted from the sword cultivators, and they had changed the direction of Sword World's future. There was no point in having a low-level spar right now, so it was better to have Loy and Lucio fight directly. It just so happened that only one of the three rooftops was left. Perhaps it was a premonition. Moreover, God Lord Avicii felt that Junimo and Tamanaji's trip this time was not simple. The two divine princes sitting here made Avicii very uncomfortable. He wanted to end the battle of the three realms as soon as possible to avoid any other incidents. All right, God Lu seemed to sense Wu Jin's mood. He said, Chior, you can go. Don't worry too much about the outcome of the battle. Practice the sword with your fellow disciples, as usual. God Lord Avicii instructed. Yes, son. This child obeys. Lucio and Loy cupped their hands together and turned to look at each other in tacit understanding. Their bodies gradually moved towards the only remaining rooftop of the floating glass field. Long Miao was injured and his condition was deteriorating. It was not suitable for him to fight again. This was the price the dragon race had to pay to defeat the Ecliptic Path. Thus, Avicii and Lucio decided to have Loy and Lucio fight first. After Long Miao's condition improved, they would decide whether to continue the battle. Wuk was the same. In his current situation, he could not interfere in the battle. Even if he wanted to, he was powerless. The next battle between Lucio and Loi would basically determine the ownership of the two realms. Either Rikugenji would merge with Avicii, or Avicii would merge with Rikugenji. At this time, countless eyes were looking at the rooftop. Lucio's name was known far and wide. He was known as the most talented swordsman in the three realms. Loi, however, appeared before the eyes of the swordsmen of the three realms for the first time. Even so, no one dared to underestimate the daughter of God Lord Avicii. Who would be the winner of this battle? Prince God Lu or Princess Avicii? Little sister Loi, I am older than you, and I have the advantage in terms of cultivation. To be fair, I will only use the divine power of Heavenly Wheel with one pattern in this battle. Lucio said righteously. Lucio said righteously. He raised his palms slightly, and a wheel of divine light of the great path appeared around him. The brilliant light extended to his limbs and bones, almost covering his entire divine body. At the edge of the wheel of light, two ripples flickered. At this moment, one of them lit up while the other was silent. Lucio had already sealed the second divine pattern. I will not hold back. Loi was very proud, but she did not reject Lucio's good intentions. It seemed that she also knew that once her opponent activated the divine power of Heavenly Wheel with two patterns, the scales of victory would definitely tilt in Lucio's favor. Lucio smiled. This battle concerned the future of the two realms. He would not hold back either. He sealed the divine pattern of one line, because he did not want to take advantage of Loi. That was all. Let's do it, Loi said. Sparkling ice crystals floated around her, and the temperature on the rooftop began to drop rapidly. Her beautiful face, which was already handsome, looked even more sacred as the ice crystals fell. It made people secretly think that she was indeed the princess of the infinite divine realm. Lucio raised his finger and pointed forward. Countless sword flows flew forward along his arm. Midway, they condensed into a dazzling divine sword that pierced through the frosty air and pierced toward Loi. But as soon as these sword chi broke into Loi's frost domain, they immediately stopped halfway and trembled uneasily. They could not move forward even half a step. Go back, Loi spat out. The frost divine will surged and invaded, permeating the divine swords and freezing them one by one, turning them into swords of icy light. These ice swords actually rolled back and stabbed toward Lucio. This scene immediately attracted the eyes of many Rikugenji mighty figures. An old man said, "This is the frost divine will of immortal Dongsheng of the eastern celestial heaven of the infinite divine realm." Have immortal Dongsheng and immortal Dongsheng become Taoist companions? Many famous Rikugenji sword gods were shocked. Immortal Dongsheng was extremely powerful and ranked among the top of the many heavenly wheels in the three major sword realms. No wonder Loi's sword was so powerful that it could reverse the sword will of the number one pride of Rikugenji. Congratulations. In the floating glass palace, God Lu said to Immortal Dongsheng. Immortal Dongsheng knew what God Lu meant. However, Immortal Dongsheng just smiled and did not explain. However, at this moment, the sword light that was covered in frost flew back, containing an extremely strong freezing intent. Lucio revealed a rare look of seriousness. She flipped her palm and slapped forward, causing the sword light to surge forward, adding another layer of brilliance to the ice light divine sword. Following that, the ice light melted, and the divine sword returned to its original appearance. With a flick of Lucio's sword finger, it flew towards Luo E again. Loi raised her arms high, put her palms together, and opened them to the sides. She said in a low voice, "Open." Buzz. A bright moon was born behind her, radiating a boundless radiance that fused together with her body. As strands of divine light extended around her body, Luo Yi's entire body became resplendent and dazzling. That light was not any weaker than Lucio's. Bright moon heavenly wheel. She really has the bloodline of an immortal lord. Many powerful figures in Rikugenji were shocked. As Loi released her heavenly wheel, the bright moon overlapped with her divine body. It was as if she was the bright moon. The chill that enveloped the rooftop became even stronger. The moonlight scattered, and the flying divine sword was infected by the moonlight. It turned into a sword of ice light, and continued to fly toward Lu Qiu. This, countless powerful sword gods were speechless. The two of them were competing with pure sword will. Lu Qiu gave a gratified smile and nodded her head in praise. It was very rare to see a sword cultivator like Luo Yi in the sword world, and the people who usually spar with him in the way of the sword would not be able to last a single round. But this princess of the seamless world was able to fight evenly with Lu Qiu when he suppressed his one-mark divine power. It was truly commendable. Lu Qiu raised an arm. His quiet body was like an unshakable, peerless divine sword, standing in place. The sword of icy light was unable to move an inch under his palm. He opened his mouth and said, "Little sister Luo Yi, it's very difficult to determine the result of our probing sword intent. Today's sword battle has reached this point, and the previous exchanges are enough to amaze the elders. All they care about now is the final result. Then let's decide the result with one sword," Loi said. "What a smart girl." After Lu Qiu finished speaking, his gaze changed. An extremely terrifying light shot out from his eyes. In his body, an imperial sword surrounded by imperial qi slowly formed. It seemed to be condensed by the heavenly wheel. The moment it left his body, it was held in his hand. Glazed sword. In the army of the seamless world, Northstar Skylord spat out an extremely solemn voice. He stared at the sword in Lu Qiu's hand. "That is Lu Qiu's sword spirit." Wuck felt an extremely terrifying sword will from the glazed sword. It felt vaguely familiar. It seemed very similar to the sword will of all things. It is both a sword spirit and a life spirit. It is also his life implement. This Lu Qiu is a genius who is pure to the bone. There is no other person like him in the entire Great Path Sword realm, the blind sword venerable praised. He silently looked at Wuck and said, "Of course, you are as well." Wuck and Lu Qiu were similar, but also different. The two of them were the same type in sword path and sword will. The difference was that Wuck only had a pure sword will. His life spirit was changeable, but his life spirit could always maintain that kind of pure and flawless sword path. But Lu Qiu only had one sword. Moreover, the terrifying thing about his sword was that it could reverse thousands of sword wills. He was the only person who could use the glaze sword almost flawlessly. Putting aside cultivation and realm, Lu Qiu's ability was above his father's. This was why there were few people in the Great Path Sword realm who could last one round against him. No wonder he is so strong. Wuck's heart was extremely uneasy. He recalled the scene when he first met Lu Qiu. At that time, he felt that in the hands of Lu Qiu, he might not be able to block one sword. It was a kind of mentality that had nothing to do with realm. It came from the essence of the sword path. But now, as Wuck became a god, his sword path had also been expanded. After training in the college, he could no longer feel that kind of absolute pressure from Lu Qiu. Even so, if he fought with Lu Qiu now, Wuck would definitely lose because of the suppression of divine power. Boom, Kacha! Layers of heavenly light of calamity surged in the sky. When Lu Qiu and Loi released their celestial wheel life spirit and blood sword will at the same time, two invisible forces of the great path poured into their body from the void. Those were the forces of Lu Qiu and Avicii Divine Lord contained in the heavenly way of the floating glass. At this time, they had been activated by their descendants and absorbed into the celestial wheel. At this moment, countless people below only felt that Lu Qiu's entire body was oppressive, like an emperor of swords, while Luo Yi's entire body gradually became transparent in the frost, becoming more and more resplendent and holy, like an ice goddess in the frost, and even her aura became erratic, strange, and unfathomable. Everyone knew that the fluctuation in Loi's sword wills originated from the power of space. That was the powerful spatial sword power of Avicii, Divine Lord. Looking at them is like watching two Divine Lords fight. The glazed sword contains all things, and Lu Qiu can condense the will of all things into his own pure sword will. The result of this battle will be revealed soon. Many swordsman cultivators in the three realms were watching, not knowing if the result matched their predictions. Chapter 2104. 114 Chinese, Network Primordial Alchemy Venerable. Chapter 2104. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation. The One Who Left. God Lu and God of Avicii stared at Tiantai quietly. There was no trace of will on their bodies. The heavenly might given to Lu Qiu and Loi came from the floating glass heavenly path. The heavenly path contained the power of Rikujinji and the endless world. At this moment, Lu Qiu and Loi's bodies seemed to reflect the two divine masters. They had perfectly replicated the bloodline power of the masters of two realms. Lu Qiu's swordsmanship was even better than his father's. Of course, everything differed from person to person. Regardless of the final outcome, it did not represent the true strength of the god lords of the two worlds. The light of tribulation flashed in the sky. Two mighty heavenly auras were imbued into Lu Qiu and Loi. Under the contrast of the heavenly wheel, they looked even more sacred, noble, and oppressive. Loi's body was transparent and filled with pure white divine light. Under the radiance of the moonlight, the 10,000 feet tall platform condensed into a world of frost, freezing it into a huge ice pillar. However, this extreme cold stopped 3 meters away from Loi. No matter what, it couldn't completely cover that one spot. However, Loi raised her head and let out a loud cry. On her transparent and holy body, a terrifying flow of frost surged and rolled in the void. The heavenly might trembled, and endless icy thorns fell from the sky. At this moment, space and frost merged, like a frost cage, completely sealing Lu Qiu from the outside world. Even the heavenly might of Rikujinji in the heavenly way was isolated outside. Li Fan. Lu Qiu's expression was extremely solemn. The glazed sword in his hand exploded with dazzling divine light. His palm brushed past the blade. He slashed towards the void. This world of ice and frost was cut apart by a thin ray of heavenly light. Suddenly, the surging will of the heavens from the outside world rushed in and bathed Lu Qiu's body once again. His eyes turned golden, and the second sword was unleashed. The glazed sword slashed diagonally in the direction of Loi. Whoosh! That ray of light that seemed to be able to cut through everything descended upon Loi's face almost instantaneously. What extreme sword intent! What silently mused. This was Lu Qiu's true strength. Those people from the sword world who fought with him in the past didn't even have the honor of facing such power. Under the glass fan sword, no one in the divine realm can withstand a single blow. The blind sword venerable murmured to himself. The 4 overlord forces and the first-rate orthodoxies of the god realm, Nangong Miao, Beidou Yi, and the others were powerless against Lu Qiu's sword. That was in the past. Now, there were only 2 people in the seamless divine realm who could receive Lu Qiu's sword, Loi and Qin Hao. Even if he was flawless, he would still have to work hard to hone his sword intent before he was qualified to fight against him. As for Li Guangxing, he was afraid that no matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't be enough. This was because the grade of his heavenly wheel was a bit low. Compared to Lu Qiu, it was still a grade lower. This was something that couldn't be made up for. The terrifying sword light cut through the great path of space and even ignored the frost will. Under Lu Qiu's sword, it was as if nothing in the world could stop it. Loi's transparent body dissipated under the light and appeared in another place. She could only dodge because she realized that space could not stop Lu Qiu's sword will. Even the frost divine will could not freeze it. The sword will from Lu Qiu's hand seemed to be able to blend with the universe. He's really strong. Li Guangxing had only heard from others that Lu Qiu was very strong. Seeing him today, he was indeed worthy of being the #1 sword cultivator in the 3 realms. Even Long Miao, who had the body of a divine dragon, would find it difficult to withstand this extreme sword light. Little sister Loi, my sword can absorb space and the luminous moon frost essence from your body. Therefore, it can ignore your power of the divine Tao. No matter how you attack, it will be destroyed by my sword. And when I strike with my sword, it will be very difficult for you to receive it. Lucio wanted to persuade Loi to give up. Loi's talent was indeed strong, but her current strength was still not his match. At this moment, waves of even more intense frost essence surged. The majestic frost will seem to be able to completely solidify the space where Lucio was. Loi obviously would not give up just because of a few words. The meaning of her existence was to defeat Lucio. This was the mission of her birth. If you want to break my sword will, either your divine Tao is a universe of its own, or your refined divine power is far stronger than mine. Lucio waved the glazed fan sword in his hand. With a simple movement, he easily resolved the surrounding danger. He knew that Loi would not give up, but it was also a fact that she could not win against him. In comparison, Wuck's potential to defeat Lucio was higher than Loi's. Unfortunately, he was born at the wrong time. Wuck did not have the time to become stronger because this sword battle would only happen once. This single battle would determine the fate of the Sword Realm. Other than that, there was another person in the Seamless Academy who was confident of defeating Lucio. That person was Qin Hao. Now that Qin Hao was not on stage, it was not difficult to see that the Seamless Sword Cultivators were preparing to use him as their final trump card. If Loi lost, then the next person to fight Lucio would definitely be his junior brother. Qin Hao was also the opponent that Lucio did not want to meet the most. What's the point of saying all this? Loi continued to release Tao attacks, each wave more ferocious than the last. The point is, Lucio's voice paused. His majestic golden pupils suddenly focused on a nearby direction. The glazed fan sword in his hand turned into a sharp beam of light and pierced forward. To save time, Loi could not win against him, and he did not want to waste his energy here. Although he was unwilling to face Qin Hao, he could only let Loi step down. Whoosh! The terrifying sword ray turned into a straight line and pierced forward. Under the pressure of Lucio's sword will, Loi's transparent body appeared in front of him. She was shocked to find that it was as if she had been fixed in place. Her body could no longer move. The frost that was originally controlling Lucio surged towards her, and a terrifying compression sound could be heard in the air. Lucio used his sword will to reverse the power of her bloodline. His will directly replaced the radiating power of the Seamless Realm. At this moment, Loi had lost the support of Heaven's might. Lucio was the only one left. How can this be? Loi's mind was in turmoil. She was extremely shocked. Was there really such a powerful sword Tao power in this world? In the past, she had heard that Lucio's sword Tao talent was very strong in the Eastern Immortal Heaven. At that time, she did not think much of it, because she was already at the pinnacle of the Sword Realm. No matter how strong Lucio was, could he surpass the Sword Realm? They both had the most outstanding bloodline in the Sword Realm. In Loi's opinion, if she and Lucio were to meet one day, it would depend on whose divine Tao was better. At most, the outcome would be half. But now the reality was in front of her. Her bloodline divine power was taken away, and the Seamless Realm power contained in the heavenly Tao of floating glass recognized Lucio. How cruel! Whose divine Tao was better? It was obvious that Lucio's control of divine power was stronger. Half was just wishful thinking. As the sword ray came closer and closer to Loi's forehead, she realized that even she could not block Lucio's sword. Perhaps in the eyes of all the elders in the three realms, she should be very proud to be able to face Lucio's sword. I have lost. Loi lowered her head and said, after losing the Heaven's Might Realm power, her transparent body returned to its original appearance. The radiance on her body was taken away, and only Lucio was left on the rooftop. Sister, you are very strong. Don't think that I am making fun of you. You are really strong. With time, you might be able to defeat me in the future. Lucio kept the glass fan sword and went forward to pat Loi's shoulder. Loi laughed bitterly. Sparkling tears flowed down her cheeks. She silently turned around and jumped down from the rooftop. With time, could it be that Lucio would not improve? She knew that Lucio was comforting her and did not want her to be sad and depressed. But if she lost this battle, what was the meaning of her existence? As expected, in the training hall, Countless swordsmen let out a long breath. As expected, Lucio won. The Princess of the Infinite Realm was still slightly inferior. When Loi stepped down from the stage, the hundreds of thousands of swordsmen in the training hall did not look at her with ridicule. On the contrary, they all looked at her with deep admiration. Loi's Shinto foundation was weak. Even if Lucio sealed one of his divine glyphs, his sword Dao experience was still there. Moreover, his talent was very monstrous. It was normal for Loi to lose. Girl, there are not many people who can force Lucio to pick up the glass fan sword. You are one of them. Venerable Dongxing's expression was gentle as he comforted her. He naturally understood that the sword Lucio used at the end was not simple. In fact, Loi had forced Lucio to use his full strength. Otherwise, he would not have been able to gain the recognition of the infinite realm power. I have disappointed you and father. Loi raised her tear-stained face. Venerable Dongxing shook his head and stroked Loi's hair. In my eyes, my daughter is the most outstanding. In Infinite's heart, you are also the most outstanding. Ha ha! Thank you for letting me win. In the floating glass palace, God Lu cupped his hands towards Divine Lord of Ichi. Lucio's victory made him beam with joy. The heavy stone in his heart had disappeared. He was very happy and cheerful. Lucio is indeed the #1 swordsman of the sword world. Brother is lucky to have such a beloved son. Divine Lord of Ichi's expression was slightly heavy. It would be a lie to say that he was not sad. After all, this battle involved the fate of 2 worlds. However, he was more concerned about Loi's feelings. Perhaps this battle with Lucio would be a blow to Loi. Why can't you useless things be like Lucio? I feel annoyed just looking at you. Dragon Master's giant dragon head glared fiercely at the group of trembling dragon sons and daughters below. Although Lucio had won this battle against the Seamless World, it also allowed Dragon Master to evaluate Long Miao. If it was Long Miao on the stage, what were his chances of winning? Want to win? It would be very, very difficult, unless it was a life and death battle, and they completely let go of the fight. Only then would Long Miao have a chance. After all, the dragon race's life force foundation was very strong. Unfortunately, they couldn't let their children decide this sword battle. That would be too cold-blooded and cruel. Brother of Ichi, is the Academy still planning to send people up? God Lu stretched out his neck and asked carefully. Although Loi had lost, the Seamless World hadn't. This was because the Academy still had other disciples. They could still send people to regain their face. As long as there was a monster more talented than Loi. But was there really such a person? God Lu didn't dare to guarantee. There probably wasn't. So he had to ask. If there wasn't, then the Seamless World would be completely eliminated from the sword battle. Next, as long as the Dragon Clan accepted, God Lu would unify the 3 realms and become an existence above the 2 divine lords. This, God Lord of Vici hesitated. He considered whether or not to continue the battle. Originally, he didn't want to expose Qin Hao's ability. Wux's perfect wheel was enough. If another one appeared in the Seamless World, it would cause panic in the 3 realms. Unfortunately, Lucio was too monstrous. Loi couldn't win. Now, he could only let Qin Hao fight. If he wanted to deal with Lucio, he had to send that kid. Lucio's words were true. If he wanted to break his glazed fan sword, he had to have his own wheel. Coincidentally, Qin Hao perfectly met this condition. His own sword skills were very powerful. He was like a monster. Empyrean Divine Lord looked down at the bottom of his statue and into the crowd of people from the Academy. He was trying to find a most ideal candidate for this battle. In the end, his smiling face suddenly froze, and the stone in his heart shattered. He did not see the calm and experienced young man in his impression. Qin Hao actually disappeared. Chapter 2105. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Broken Glaze Fan Sword in the Floating Glaze Palace. God Lu and Dragon Lord looked at Sword God of Ichi, waiting for a long time without a response. God of Ichi was stunned. He couldn't figure out why Qin Hao left without saying goodbye. How could the three realms be trifled with? Before he left, he did think of letting Qin Hao fight. He had no choice but to do so. The premise was that Loi defeated Lu Qiu. The probability of that accident was not high. In truth, Wu Jian also knew that even though he had joined forces with Venerable Dongsheng to create the strongest bloodline in the divine realm, his foundation in the realm force was still weak. In terms of cultivation time, comprehension of the divine Tao, application, and other aspects, Luo Yi was still lacking compared to Lu Qiudi. There were many things that couldn't be created to achieve the desired effect, and had nothing to do with bloodlines. Bloodline could only increase one's chances of victory, but it couldn't guarantee victory. Although Qin Hao's cultivation was shallow, he had a perfect heaven wheel, after all, which had an intrinsic suppressive effect on other heavenly supreme Tao cultivators. In addition, Qin Hao himself was also a genius, and his comprehension was extraordinarily high. He had a unique understanding of the heavenly supreme Tao, and that kind of experience did not seem to belong to someone who had cultivated for 10,000 years. For this reason, Avicii once suspected that Qin Hao had fallen to the mortal world and recultivated. But it was useless to say anything now. Qin Hao left quietly. With Loi defeated, who could the Academy send to fight Lu Qiu? Avicii? Avicii? God Lu's call made Avicii come back to his senses. He gave him an awkward but polite smile. It seems that there are no more sword cultivators in the three realms to fight. Jun Mo looked at Lu Qiu, who was covered in dazzling divine light. This should be the most talented sword cultivator in the sword world. Could the item be with him? Back then, the three realms sent people to investigate the ruins of the Saint Spirit world. Jun Mo didn't completely trust Mubai's confession. If the Mirror of Samsara was really taken by the sword world, it might not be with someone from the Avicii realm. It might be with Mubai himself. Therefore, Jun Mo did not go to the Academy at that time. Thinking about it from another perspective, if the sword realm obtained the Mirror of Samsara, who would be most suitable to use it? The reincarnation mirror was an item of chaos at the beginning of the untainted land. It was the same as Tamanaji's Jade Heaven Bell. However, the reincarnation mirror was more useful. It could be used to train one's cultivation and allow the heavenly wheel to develop divine patterns in a short period of time. That was what Jun Mo desired the most. If he wanted to become a divine king faster than others, the reincarnation mirror was indispensable. Jun Mo didn't care which sword world took it. He only understood that it was worth it, so he would only wear it on the most talented sword practitioner. Neither Long Mian nor Loi released the breath of the reincarnation mirror before. That thing had a spirit and could protect its owner. Lu Qiu was different. Lu Qiu had not used his full strength until now. It was most likely that the reincarnation mirror was hidden on him. The more Jun Mo thought about it, the more sinister the look in his eyes became. He continued, I finally passed by the Great Path Sword Realm and happened to run into a sword practitioner duel. In that case, I like to see the talent of the most talented sword practitioner in the three realms. After that, without giving God Lu and the others a chance to react, he slowly rose from his throne and walked through the air. He walked step by step from the floating glass palace to the rooftop until he stood across from Lu Qiu. This scene silenced the entire floating glass palace and even the entire floating glass city. In the Archean realm, Jun Mo, the son of divine King Tianzhao, challenged Lu Qiu. The huge shock shocked everyone. No one had expected this to happen. The successor of the divine king was challenging the most talented sword practitioner in the three realms. How could they not be shocked? Your Royal Highness. God Lu's face changed slightly, and his heart skipped a beat. Lord Fenwei interrupted him. His Royal Highness is itching to test the abilities of the son of God Lu. You won't turn down divine King Tianzhao, will you? Boom! The words Tianzhao, God King, came out of Fenwei's mouth. It was like a mountain pressing down on God Lu's heart, causing him to feel particularly heavy. The words he wanted to say were stuck in his throat. He could only laugh bitterly. No, would God Lu dare? But if he did, he was even more worried about Lu Qiu. None of the divine princes in this world were mediocre. They were all the most talented cultivators in the primeval age. Could Lucio withstand it? Godlord Fervor was glaring at Lu Chun from the side. His eyes were filled with malice. The name God King Tianzhao suppressed God Lu Chen's anger. If he didn't want to fight, he had to. At that moment, as Jun Mo stepped onto the platform, Lucio glanced in the direction of the floating glass hall. Seeing the bitterness on his father's face, Lucio took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He said to Jun Mo, "It's my honor to fight with your Royal Highness. Your Royal Highness, please enlighten me." Helplessness was written all over God Lu's face. Even though he didn't know what Junmo's intention was, Lucio could only accept it. Otherwise, offending Jun Mo was the same as trampling on the dignity of the God King. Jun Mo looked up and waved his robe in the air. The jade heavenly bell, which was filled with the sound of chaos, turned into a beam of light and flew toward Ulyoji. When the jade heavenly bell was moved out, the floating glass dojo immediately changed. The vast and majestic aura disappeared, and only the power of the sword world remained in the heavenly Tao. "Next, attack me with all your strength," Jun Mo ordered Lucio. His calm face gave off a heavy pressure. "Ha, this Jun Mo." Ulyoji put away the jade heaven bell and laughed coldly. The son of the divine king of Tianzhao wanted to rely on his own strength to completely defeat Lucio in the pure heavenly Tao of sword cultivators. How arrogant! However, Jun Mo had the capital to be arrogant, and he also had the ability to do so because he was the divine prince. He took the jade heaven bell out. Does His Royal Highness look down on the most powerful swordsman in the sword realm? Everyone in the three realms had witnessed Lucio's strength. Even the daughter of the god of infinity had been defeated by the glazed fan sword. And this Jun Mo, who was not from the sword realm, wanted to fight Lucio, who had never been defeated in his life in the heavenly Tao. He was showing off his confidence to the extreme. Below the statue of God Lu, the commanders of the 8 tribes were dissatisfied. In their opinion, even if Jun Mo was the son of the divine king, he shouldn't have looked down on their Prince Lu. "Excuse me." The look in Lucio's eyes changed slightly, and there was a hint of sharpness in them. With the glass fan sword on his back, he flipped his palm and pushed forward. The sword energy around him glowed brightly. Endless sword energy flew out from Lucio's body and rushed toward Jun Mo like a magnificent river of swords. Jun Mo's face didn't change at all. When the river of swords was about to hit him, he swung his hand, bang. With a deafening explosion, the violent light of the divine will exploded from Jun Mo's palm. With one hit, the entire river of swords was destroyed. "In front of me, there's no need for cheap tricks. You have one last chance. Give it your all." Jun Mo's voice grew colder. At this moment, the training hall was in an uproar. Seeing this, Lucio's heart skipped a beat. The glass fan sword on his back slowly rose up, shining with an unparalleled sharpness. Lucio's hand brushed across the blade, and beams of sword energy fell from the sky. There were 3 beams in total. 3 beams of sword energy fell upon Lucio at the same time. At this moment, he was extremely dazzling. Whoosh! The glass fan sword moved. It was still the light that cut through everything. The sword energy contained in this sword was even stronger than when it defeated Loi, because it contained the power of the 3 realms. The sharp light slanted above Jun Mo's head. The entire floating glazed training hall was silent. Everyone held their breaths as they saw Jun Mo use 2 fingers to casually catch the light that cut through everything. Then, the glass fan sword shattered. Blood spurted out from Lucio's mouth. The action of vomiting blood seemed to have spat out his internal organs. When his life weapon shattered, the indescribable pain swept over him like a tsunami. It was so painful that he wished he was dead. From this moment on, Lucio was no longer the most outstanding junior of the Great Path Sword Realm. The life weapon was connected to the life spirit. Jun Mo's seemingly casual attack had crippled Lucio. Chapter 2106. 114 Chinese Network Primordial Alchemy Venerable. Chapter 2106 Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, where the nightmare begins. God Lu leaped forward from his throne, and God Lord Fervor stood up at the same time. Two God Lords' terrifying auras exploded in the floating glass field. Their palms collided, and the earth shook. Looking from afar, the buildings in Floating Glass City were collapsing at a terrifying speed, and the ground was torn apart. Thump, thump, two sounds. Dragon Master and God, Lord of Ichi, stood up from their seats at the same time. Although today was the sword battle of the three realms, the three realms were still closely related to each other. Now that Lu Qiu had been crippled by Junimo for no reason, they naturally could not sit by and do nothing. Out of kindness, I advise the two of you not to act rashly. Tamanaji's slender fingers tapped on the armrest of the chair, creating a tap-tap sound. This sound was like a mountain, isolating Dragon Lord and Empyrean God Lord from the Dao field, preventing them from taking even half a step forward. Why? God Lu roared, his bloodshot eyes glaring at God Lord Fenway. God Lord Fervor snickered as he firmly stood in front of the man, not bothering to explain. I can get everything I want. Even if you can hide for a while, you can't escape from my grasp in the end. Junimo looked down from above, lifting his foot and gently pressing on Lu Qiu's chest, stomping him on the ground. What is your highness talking about? I don't understand. Enduring the pain of his life spirit being crippled, Lu Qiu did not lose his mind. He tried his best to remain calm. He knew that any trace of resistance could bring disaster to Rikugenji, just like the saint's spirit world that had turned into ruins. You don't understand? Junimo looked down at Lu Qiu with suspicion in his eyes. He exerted force in his feet, and the sole of his foot, which was glowing with divine light, gradually sank into Lu Qiu's chest. At this moment, the sound of bones cracking could be clearly heard from Lu Qiu's chest. The pain caused him to cry out involuntarily. Junimo, the Lu God world, and the Tianzhao God realm will mind our own business. If you let my son go, I will promise you anything. I will give you anything. God Lu shouted hoarsely. Junimo acted as if he did not hear anything. He bent his body slightly and increased the strength of his foot. The foot, which was wrapped in divine light, seemed to melt into Lu Qiu's chest. Just now, he had only destroyed Lu Qiu's life spirit, but he had not destroyed the heavenly wheel. Your Highness, I, Lu Qiu, have never done anything wrong. Although I have traveled through the myriad worlds, I have never been to the primeval realm, nor have I entered the heavenly order divine realm. I hope your Highness can investigate this matter thoroughly. Blood gushed out of Lu Qiu's mouth like a fountain. He had no strength to stop the foot from sinking into his flesh. I never say the second time when I talk to people. Today, I have broken the rule twice in a row on you. For the last time, take out the reincarnation mirror. Junimo squeezed through his teeth. I really don't know. Please, your Highness. Please, your Highness. Lu Qiu's voice was extremely weak, and his words were already stuttering. Junimo, I will kill you. God Lu roared. God Lord Fenway sneered. You could try. This is the Sword Realm. If you want to start a Divine Lord battle in the Sword Realm, I will gladly oblige. You? God Lu pointed at God, Lord Fenway angrily, and looked sadly at Fuli City. They had just exchanged a palm strike, but it had almost destroyed the entire city. Countless innocent people had died from the shock. However, this place was merely a small plane in the Sword Realm. If you were to go all out against God Lord Fervor, a battle between God Lords would instantly affect the entire Earth God realm. At that time, many living beings would die a violent death, save his son, or destroy the entire Rikugenji. God Lu was in an extreme dilemma. Dragon Lord and God, Lord of Ichi, could only sigh when they saw this. Take it out. Junimo roared at Lu Qiu and spat on Lu Qiu's face. I really don't have the mirror of reincarnation. Lu Qiu's eyes were bloodshot. Since Junimo came, Lu Qiu had always been respectful and respectful. There was no way he would steal from him. Fine, fine, fine. Junimo laughed. I will know if you really don't have it, or if you're just trying to hide it. If you really don't have it, then you can die. Divine power flowed along Junmo's legs and rushed toward Lu Chio's broken chest. The mirror of reincarnation could protect its master. If it was really in Lu Chio's hands, it would definitely show up. If it wasn't, then the so-called strongest sword cultivator in the sword realm was no different from an ant in Junmo's eyes. He would turn him into dust. Junimo, God Lu, knew that Lu Chio was about to die, but his clenched fists gradually weakened. Below the statue, the 8 divine generals all unleashed their Tian Luan power. However, the Tian Luan experts who came with Junimo from the Tianzhou divine realm glared at their descendants. Today, the floating glass arena gathered the most elite members of the god race from the 3 realms. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. This is probably my ending. Lu Chio smiled bleakly. Feeling the divine power from Junimo, he slowly closed his eyes. He had lived a proud and miserable life. Lu Chio never thought that he would live a life of 2 extremes. However, he was unwilling to accept this. In the floating glass arena, the Tianzhou divine realm experts and the 8 divine generals were at daggers drawn. Mubai hid behind his elders and looked at Lu Chio at Junmo's feet. Long Miao, who only had 1 arm left, clenched his fist. He was surrounded by Dragon Qi, but his brother Long Tian kept him in place. In the academy team, the sound of the sword pavilion came from Wuk's body. Severing Love stepped forward and stood in front of Wuk. His old face shook slightly at him. Now, no one could change Lu Chio's fate, not even God Lu. Wuk, a mere disciple of the academy, would be like a moth to a flame. However, just as Lu Chio was about to die, from afar, a dazzling beam of sword light pierced through the great path and came back. Its aura was perfectly compatible with the space. This beam of sword light instantly descended on the rooftop, as if it had been there from the beginning and had never left. Bam! A fist wrapped in divine power punched forward. Majestic flames erupted in front of Junmo. Junmo's gaze turned cold. He stretched out his 5 fingers and punched forward forcefully. A deafening explosion rang out from the training hall. Flames filled the sky as Junmo's body slid back crazily, leaving a mark on the rooftop. Feeling the familiar aura beside him, the weak Lu Chio opened his eyes and said in a sad voice, "Chu-san, you shouldn't have attacked." Chapter 2107. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The perfect dual Junmo's terrifying strength had completely exceeded Lu Chio's level. The strength of the 2 sides were not even on the same level. Junmo's strength was simply not on the same level. Even ants would struggle to survive, let alone humans, let alone Lu Chio, who was the center of attention in the sword world. He didn't want to die like this without knowing why. But if Lu Chio lived and caused trouble for others, even if he survived, he wouldn't feel at ease for the rest of his life. Moreover, Qin Hao was implicated. That was why he said Qin Hao shouldn't have helped. Lu Chio's death was enough. He didn't want the sword world to lose another top genius. The silence was terrifying. Only Qin Hao's heavy breathing could be heard. His eyes were like a vigilant beast as he stared at Junmo. He didn't respond to Lu Chio. The reason he turned back wasn't just to save Lu Chio. It was because Qin Hao had a deep grudge with Junmo. They were irreconcilable enemies. Back then, his soul was extracted and he was banished to the lower realm. Junmo was the cause of all this. If Zhang Wu didn't crack his head with the 999 buckles and use the god of war to intervene, Qin Hao wouldn't even have the chance to be expelled from the Archean realm. He wouldn't even be able to bring a trace of his soul out of the Tianzhou realm. Junmo was the demon buried deep in his nightmare. Now, the nightmare had resurfaced. Everyone had their own difficulties and fears, and Qin Hao was no exception. But this time, he didn't want to run away anymore. He didn't want to tremble in front of the demon in his heart forever. The most powerful way to destroy fear was to face it directly. Senior Lu, Qin Hao shouted. He grabbed Lu Qiu and threw him at God Lu. God Lu took advantage of Lu Qiu's unpreparedness. Sword light wrapped around Lu Qiu and pulled him back to his side. Then, he immediately retreated to the center of the eight. Qiu. God Lu looked at his son, whose soul had been destroyed. Tears fell from his eyes. His heart was in pain. The glazed fan sword was Lu Qiu's life weapon. His life spirit was his only sword spirit. Even though Tian Luan was still there, from this moment on, Lu Qiu was no longer the Lu Qiu of the past. He could only become an ordinary swordsman among the masses. Who was he? Translation, 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 translation. Translation, translation, translation. Translation, translation. Hearing translation, translation, translation. Translation of the school level translation school. Translation translator. Nioibo, studio editor. Nioibo studio, there was a sword art cultivator in the three great sword realms who was stronger than Lu Qiu and Loi. Suddenly, the true dragon sword realm and Rikujinji were in an uproar. If Jun Mo hadn't come today, the two people fighting on the sky platform would have been God Lu's son and the academy disciple who had saved him. Wu Ji is poisonous. Dragon Master glanced at God Wu Ji. With such a powerful trump card in his hand, it was no wonder that Loi could remain calm after being defeated. At this moment, God Wu Ji's expression was not good. Everyone in the academy was nervous. Cold sweat broke out on their palms as they watched Jun Mo and Qin Hao. Li Chuji had returned and saved Lu Qiu. But how was he going to resolve the danger he was in? Jun Mo's strength was inhumanly strong. The Divine Prince's strength was not at the level of Divine Tao that people could perceive. He had defeated Lu Qiu very easily. He hadn't even released his sky wheel. Such a person was too terrifying. Could Qin Hao defeat him? No one dared to speak. At this moment, the powerful figures and big shots of the God Realm were completely at a loss. They didn't know what they should do or what they could do. They were extremely weak and could only watch the situation unfold. There are more talented people in the Sword Realm. After a long time, Jun Mo came back to his senses. He stared gloomily at the remaining flame particles on his palm. This punch had caused him to feel a slight burning pain. Although he hadn't released his sky wheel, there were very few people in the untainted land who could cause him pain. Jun Mo's gaze slowly fell on Qin Hao. This person's flame was very unusual. His aura was also different. Could the item be on him? Qin Hao and Jun Mo looked at each other. No one spoke, but they seemed to have a tacit understanding. They began to walk towards each other at the same time. Their walking speed became faster and faster, as if they were sprinting. Suddenly, Qin Hao pointed forward. A sharp light shot out from his fingertip. He released the divine power of the Red Lotus and fused it with the Calamity Sword. It merged into the Golden Finger. It contained the great Tao of space. When he attacked, he combined many supreme skills. The sword energy instantly descended on Jun Mo's face. One could imagine how terrifying its speed and destructive power were. Whoosh! The finger light flew past his cheek. A lock of hair fell on his shoulder. Jun Mo's expression changed. He blurted out, "Condensing pill finger." This person's finger technique was the primeval realm's supreme skill of the venerable Alchemy clan, condensing pill finger. He was a member of the venerable Alchemy clan. While Jun Mo was distracted, Qin Hao's flaming fist was already in front of him. Jun Mo's guess was right. It was the condensing pill finger. However, it was the golden finger that Qin Hao had derived from the condensing pill finger. He had abandoned the way of condensing pill and focused on killing. He only cared about killing the enemy. Boom! The two punched each other. Divine light danced wildly with flames. Because of Jun Mo's distraction, Jun Mo's speed of gathering the power was half a beat slower. Qin Hao knocked the son of the Divine King of Tianzhou back again. Then, he struck out with his palm. A terrifying flaming sword light appeared. This attack also ignored the great Tao of space. The moment the flame appeared, it cut down on Jun Mo's head. "Your Royal Highness." The strong cultivators of the divine king of Tianzhou were shocked. However, Junmo's complexion didn't change. His body remained rooted to the ground like a boulder. Then, he swung his palm and extinguished the flaming sword light. However, Junmo's mouth issued a si sound at this time. Then, he hurriedly retreated. His left hand was still covering his right hand. He was at a disadvantage. The swordsmen of the three realms were shocked. The strong cultivators of the divine king of Tianzhou couldn't believe it either. Tamanaji's fox-like eyes flashed. The two from Tianai had only exchanged 3 moves, but Junmo was already at a disadvantage. God of Infinity, Sword Master Gu, Severing Love, and the others weren't happy. On the contrary, they were even more worried. If Qin Hao had defeated Lu Qiu, it wouldn't have been a problem. However, his opponent was the Divine Prince. No matter what, Qin Hao couldn't hurt him, let alone win. He could win, but he couldn't. However, if Qin Hao was even slightly defeated, he wouldn't have a good ending. Judging from Lu Qiu's miserable state, it was obvious that Junmo was ruthless. Do you think you can defeat me, Master of Alchemy? The look on Junmo's face sharpened. With a shake of his right hand, he scattered the remaining sparks. His body began to emit a solemn divine light. Inch by inch, his black robe became a dazzling armor. It was awe-inspiring. Dong! Junmo stopped retreating. He stomped his feet on the ground and shot forward. He threw a punch at Qin Hao. The fist light was different from before. There seemed to be an illusion of a divine seal hidden in the fist light. At this moment, the great Tao was sealed by a force. Qin Hao seemed as if he'd expected this since the beginning. At the instant Junmo's fist might and Tao insight effused over, his footsteps that were charging forward instantly stopped, and then he soared into the sky like a divine dragon before flying towards the boundless space. Crack! Junmo's fist light hit nothing. The power of the great Tao of sealing swept past. A straight broken fault appeared on the sky platform. From the broken fragments, a terrifying black hole appeared. What kind of power is this? Long Yu, the prince of divine Lord Long Ao, looked extremely shocked. The great Tao of shattering and suppression, Long Yu said solemnly. Long Ao said solemnly. He looked over and saw Junmo leaping up as well, turning into a beam of light and chasing after Qin Hao. The divine kings were born at the beginning of the chaos. They retained the most primitive and complete power. Every divine king's bloodline was extremely powerful. Most of their descendants had perfect celestial wheels. Very few of them had accidents. For example, Long Ao didn't perfectly inherit the dragon power of Dragon King Wan Sheng. He had only forged a celestial wheel. However, Junmo was the most outstanding descendant of divine King Tianzhou. Because his great Tao of celestial wheels was complete, he could ignore the suppression of the sword world. In the world of sword Tao, which Lu Qiu was most proficient in, he could crush her. However, the divine king's bloodline had different characteristics. Although they all had perfect celestial wheels, their abilities were different. For example, Divine Sword King's Sword Tao was perfect. Dragon King Wan Sheng was the supreme god of the dragon race. He ruled over different kinds of dragons. Divine King Tianzhou was most proficient in the great Tao of shattering and suppression, and it was perfectly reflected in Junmo whoosh. Whoosh! High in the sky, 2 streams of light shot into the sky. Each of them had a long shadow. One was a blood-red flame, and the other was dazzling. Junmo's speed was obviously several times faster than Qin Hao's. Because of his deep foundation of the divine path, the dazzling shadow caught up with the flame in the blink of an eye and pierced through it. Bang! The rising flame exploded. Just as everyone was worried, they realized that Qin Hao's figure was nowhere to be seen. He disappeared? Long Mia asked. Divine Lord Long Ao shook his head. Watch carefully. This battle is extremely precious to you. It might be difficult for you to see it a second time. At this point, how could Dragon Lord not see that Qin Hao also had a perfect celestial wheel, which which could greatly weaken the suppression of the heavenly Tao of the various realms of the untainted land. However, his foundation was not as strong as Junmo's, so he could not completely ignore it. Even so, the battle between the two was already at the pinnacle of the untainted land. From Long Ye's perspective, it would be difficult for him to see it a second time. "Get out here!" Junmo's domineering voice reverberated in the sky. Wearing his majestic divine king armor, he floated in the air. His gloomy eyes slowly turned. His divine sense began to spread out in the boundless sky, trying to find Qin Hao's trace. He knew in his heart that Qin Hao hadn't disappeared, but because his speed was too fast, ordinary divine sense couldn't keep up with his movements. Perhaps Qin Hao was circling around Junmo at this time and would suddenly attack. The more he thought about it, the gloomier and sharper Junmo's eyes became. This was the Sovereign of Pill's supreme escape technique, the divine walk heaven-stomping art. Once upon a time, Junmo had suffered greatly in front of the divine walk heaven-stomping art. In the end, he managed to extract the soul of a Sovereign of Pills and banish him to a lower world. However, that experience had once been a disgrace to Junmo, and he had yet to wash it off. Coincidentally, the divine walk heaven-stomping art had appeared before him again today. This scene was rather familiar, and it evoked that deep and humiliating memory in his heart. Chapter 2108. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. High up in the sky, there were no clouds for thousands of miles. There was not even a gust of wind, only the sharp sound of swords. Everyone looked up. Beams of sword chi flashed through the void, swift and fierce. They turned into a huge starlight pattern, trapping Junmo in the center. The sword chi stabbed at him from different angles, striking his body frequently. Junmo was hit by the sword chi, and dazzling sparks exploded from his God King armor as he roared furiously. The divine trampling technique was too fast. It was the life-saving technique of the primordial alchemy lord race. Weak alchemists had always used it to escape. No one had ever seen someone use the divine trampling technique to launch a violent attack. Junmo could not keep up with the divine trampling technique, so he could only be trapped in the starlight sword formation and take the beating. Although the flaming sword chi could not penetrate the God King armor, the power of the sword Tao they carried struck him. Every sword chi that exploded from his body made Junmo's organs feel like they were heavily injured. His blood and chi roiled, and after a while, his face was also covered in small wounds due to the sword chi. The countless sword gods of the three realms couldn't help but sigh as they watched this scene. Qin Hao truly was powerful. If his opponent had been Lucio instead of Junmo, then it was very likely that he would have been able to represent the Seamless Academy in winning this battle and fusing the God Realm and the True Dragon Realm together. What a pity. That was Junmo, not Lucio. Junmo seemed to be at a disadvantage, but everyone knew that this divine prince had not shown his true strength yet. Boom! Surging divine light erupted from the center of the starlight sword formation, sweeping through the world like a tide. The rampaging law particles annihilated everything, causing the heavenly Tao of floating glass to cry out in pain. The beams of sword chi shuttling back and forth were instantly annihilated, and the starlight sword formation was torn to pieces. Blood flowed from the corner of Qin Hao's mouth as his body fell from the void. He had given Junmo over 10,000 swords, but he was no match for the divine prince's burst of divine power. I once swore an oath that I would never be trapped by the heaven-trampling technique a second time in my life. Because of this, I sought the Tao from my father and cultivated arduously. In the end, I cultivated a divine, forbidden technique. Junmo's body was surrounded by divine light. His long hair danced in the wind. His gloomy eyes stared at Qin Hao, who was falling from his feet. His gaze was extremely cold. The past engraved in his memories allowed him to feel it. He recognized who the person in front of him was. Although he had changed his appearance and assumed the identity of a sword cultivator from the sword world, the arrogance in Qin Hao's bones and his wildness in battle still allowed Jun Mo to see through his true identity at a glance. Then, Jun Mo slowly raised his hand above his head. An extremely resplendent God King seal erupted with boundless light that engulfed all of Floating Glass City. By the order of Heaven's edict, draw a circle and suppress. Jun Mo's palm pressed down, and the God King seal left his hand. It turned into a boundless mountain that shone with divine light and chased after Qin Hao's falling figure. At that moment, everyone felt as if the floating glass heavenly way above their heads had collapsed. The entire heavens covered the ground, and the heavy suppressive force caused the sword cultivators of the three realms in the floating glass field to be unable to move. Their bodies did not listen to them at all. This was the great Tao suppression divine art of chaos, and it was personally created by the divine king of Heaven's edict. In order to get rid of the entanglement of a movement technique, Jun Mo had specifically asked the divine king of Heaven's edict for help. The divine king had personally created the technique, and he had painstakingly trained it, finally mastering it. And this great Tao suppression divine art was created by Jun Mo because of one person. Countless sword cultivators below trembled as they looked at the huge mountain that was pressing down. Even a Northern Dipper celestial venerable, who was proficient in the mountain-moving technique, felt powerless. The Northern Dipper clan's mountain-moving divine art could move tens of thousands of mountains, but this divine king of Heaven's edict only made the celestial venerable feel heavy and powerless. Jun Mo's cold voice spread out, and no one understood the true meaning of his words. At that moment, Tamanaji, who was sitting in the floating glass hall, leisurely said in a clear voice, "There's a strange story that has been passed down in the primeval realm. One day, a noble and illustrious divine prince went on a hunting expedition and met two youths. Coincidentally, the prey that the two youths were chasing had been injured by the divine prince. Thus, a dispute arose, and neither side gave way. Jun Mo's status was noble, and the two youths were not ordinary people either. One was the son of the war god city's city lord, and the bloodline of the ancestor god war god king flowed in his veins. The other was a member of the venerable Alchemy clan. The history of the venerable Alchemy clan was extremely long. It could be traced back to the beginning of the untainted land. Originally, they were the descendants of a divine king. Unfortunately, that divine king, who pursued the limits of the Tao of alchemy and tried in vain to refine the entire untainted land and condense the untainted land back into primal chaos, did not succeed. In the end, he refined himself to death. The pitiful divine king, who was obsessed with the Tao of alchemy, only left behind a few useless alchemy scriptures and a pitiful amount of alchemy techniques for his descendants. Furthermore, those alchemy techniques were used to protect one's life, and their offensive power was very weak. From then on, the venerable Alchemy clan fell from the ancient god clan of the untainted land to a second-rate god clan of the primeval realm. However, there were no absolutes in reality. There were people who liked to take unconventional paths everywhere. The youth of the venerable Alchemy clan, who traveled together with the young lord of the war god city, was a freak. He cultivated the congealing finger and sky trampling technique left behind by the divine ancestor of alchemy into offensive techniques. In the battle, the noble prince, who had never suffered a loss, was injured. He was beaten to a pulp by the two youths, especially by the venerable Alchemy clan's divine traversing heaven trampling technique. He suffered greatly and suffered the greatest humiliation of his life. He didn't get his prey, but returned covered in shame. The Yunzhe divine realm was not in the primeval realm, but matters between god-king factions could easily spread to each other's ears. Thus, Tamanaji was clear about the entire process. That battle was the most difficult battle Jun Mo had ever fought, and it caused a demonic barrier to appear in his heart. I see. God Lord Long Ao looked at Qin Hao, who had fallen down the divine mountain. He also understood that this was the youth of the venerable Alchemy clan. He had also heard of this matter in the past. After the battle, in order to wash away the demonic barrier in Junmo's heart and not let him be trapped in the God King Road, Tianzhao had ordered the capture of the youth. The God Realm had sent an army to the venerable Alchemy clan and brought the youth into the Tianzhao divine realm. No one knew what terrifying things the youth had experienced after he was taken away. War God City had asked the War God King to appear. In the end, the young city lord had only brought back a wisp of his shattered divine soul from the Tianzhao divine realm, as well as a divine source that hadn't dissipated in time. He had left his hometown alone and exiled from the primeval realm. This was the price of the War God clan. The Tianzhao divine king had given the War God King face and spared the life of the venerable Alchemy clan youth. This face had to be exchanged for something of equal value. The two youths who had injured his son would never be able to return to the primeval realm. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a second chance to leave. The remnant soul that was taken away by the War God City's young city lord should be him. Long Ao sighed deeply. Fate was playing tricks on them. They had once been enemies that they couldn't live under the same sky with. Today, whether it was Qin Hao or Junmo, it wouldn't end well. One of them would die. Buzz. The wind whistled in his ears as a boundless power pressed down on his body. The surrounding space was completely sealed and isolated. The power of all things was sucked dry, leaving only the suppression Great Tao. At this moment, Qin Hao was below the huge projection of the Divine Mountain. Above him was a towering object. He couldn't move at all. He fell crazily with the Divine Mountain. After 20,000 years, Junmo had also improved. The suppression Great Tao was even stronger. He had specially cultivated this set of divine restriction technique for Qin Hao. It had already completely restrained the heaven-stomping technique. Under the suppression of the chaos, the heaven-stomping technique couldn't be used. At this moment, the towering mountain flickered with terrifying sword light. Sword chi flowed out and began to rain down, piercing towards the immobile Qin Hao. In the blink of an eye, the sky was filled with sharp and resonant sword shadows. How terrifying! He actually used the power of the sword realm to fight back with sword arts. The sword cultivators of the three realms were extremely shocked. Junmo wasn't from the sword realm, nor was he a sword cultivator. He wasn't even good at sword arts. However, he had brought everyone a terrifying, killing sword formation. He had completely used his divine will to trigger the heavenly might to attack Qin Hao. This was the Divine Prince, the noble bloodline of the Divine King. I can't move. He even reversed the power of the heavenly might realm. Qin Hao's body fell crazily as if he was falling into a bottomless abyss. He could clearly see all the power of the Great Tao that Junmo used. In fact, the sword formation was full of loopholes. There was no essence of the sword Tao to speak of. The truly terrifying part was the chaos suppression art that Divine King Tianzhao had created for Junmo. If it wasn't for the suppression of this set of divine restriction technique, Junmo definitely wouldn't be able to hurt him at all. Spots of fire appeared on his chakra. Qin Hao could see the loopholes in the sword formation and also the way the chaos divine forbidden art worked. He was 50% confident that he could break it and escape from the suppression of the Great Tao. Unfortunately, his current strength was not enough. He needed to borrow a powerful divine artifact, the Lord Dao Jun Ruler. However, he didn't have the Lord Dao Jun Ruler with him. Boom! There was no other way. Qin Hao could only explode with the heavenly chakra and reverse the heavenly way to break through. At this moment, a dazzling divine light bloomed from below the huge shadow of the towering mountain. It snaked around Qin Hao's body. Divine power covered every inch of his body and completely turned him into a radiant human figure. It was extremely beautiful. Qin Hao's falling momentum stopped. The heavenly wheel on his body radiated endless brilliance. The blood in his body roared, and the vast divine will of the universe merged with the sword will of the three realms. The heavenly path of the collapsing, floating glass changed. It seemed to be supported by a living force. The pressure that shrouded the heads of countless swordsmen disappeared, and everyone regained their freedom. At this time, everyone was covered in cold sweat. Bang! The sword light pierced through the sky. The divine mountain was shattered. The mighty sword light brushed past Junmo's body and flew to the end of the void. A terrifying light of catastrophe erupted there. It was as if the universe had been shattered. When Qin Hao broke Junmo's chaotic divine forbidden technique, his body began to rise again. He returned to his previous height. At this moment, his temperament had undergone a heaven-defying change. The dazzling heavenly chakra circled around his body. The great Tao became one with it, forming a universe of its own. The solemn divine light made people not dare to look at him directly. He stood there like an independent world. Faintly, through the divine light on his body, one could even see the vague shadow of 2 continents in the heavenly chakra. An extremely powerful will of all living beings filled his heavenly chakra. It made him seem as noble as Junmo perfect. Junmo opened his eyes wide and stared at Qin Hao's heavenly chakra. He clenched his fists so tightly that blue veins popped out on his forehead and neck. It was as if he was expressing the shock and anger in his heart. That youth from the Pill venerable clan who had once humiliated him not only reforged his heavenly chakra, but also forged a heavenly chakra that was even stronger than in his previous life. It was a heavenly chakra that countless gods yearned for even in their dreams. So what if you broke my bones, extracted my soul, and banished me from the archaic realm? This heavenly chakra is all thanks to you. Speaking of which, I still have to thank you. Qin Hao's golden eyes didn't carry any emotion. He looked at Junmo as if he was looking at an ordinary person. There was even a faint trace of contempt in his eyes, as if he was ridiculing him. For the sake of this heavenly chakra, he drifted away from 10,000 worlds, tossing and turning. After experiencing 4 lives, Zhang Wu had suffered too much. However, if Zhang Wu was also here and could see the wonderful expression on Junmo's face, he would definitely be very happy. Chapter 2109. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The floating glass arena fell into a brief silence. The swordsmen of the 3 realms and the divine masters looked at the great Tao wheel that surrounded Qin Hao. Another perfect divine master. Furthermore, God Lu and Dragon Master realized that Qin Hao's perfect sky wheel was different from Wux's. Wux's sword was pure, untainted, and flawless, but only his sword Tao was perfect. Qin Hao's sky wheel, on the other hand, could swallow everything in the universe. Its compatibility level was higher than Wux's unique sword Tao, and it was even more majestic and boundless. At this moment, Tamanaji also stood up from his seat. His calm face became more and more solemn, and his eyes flashed with surprise. Putting aside the fact that Qin Hao and Junmo were mortal enemies, today's battle could be said to be at the pinnacle of the desolate era. The following battle would definitely be brilliant, and it was rare even among the Divine King's forces. After all, a battle between Divine Princes would not break out into a life-and-death battle, unless the Divine King started a world-ending war. Haha! After a long time, Junmo laughed out loud. He laughed so hard that tears almost flowed out his eyes. He stared at Qin Hao and gritted his teeth, saying, "Good, good, good, very good. This is even more exciting, and it also makes me want to conquer more. If you are still the same as before, I will be disappointed." After 20,000 years, not only did Junmo's divine Tao improve, but so did Qin Hao. Back then, Qin Hao used a mere Saint Sky wheel to make his perfect divine prince suffer and suffer humiliation. Today, Qin Hao had returned from rebirth and forged a perfect sky wheel. His foundation was completely new. Putting aside his background, both sides were very close to equal in terms of conditions. This battle was fair. If Qin Hao did not improve, Junmo would not be happy even if he killed 10,000 Saint Sky wheels. Even the number one genius of the sword world, Lucio, was like an ant in his eyes. Now that he had killed someone who was infinitely close to his own strength, he felt a greater sense of accomplishment. Only then could he completely wash away the shame that had never been erased from Junmo's heart, allowing him to regain his supreme dignity as the Prince of God. Today is the third day of the Lunar New Year. It's dangerous. Li Guangxing closed his eyes sadly and sighed. Many disciples of the academy lowered their heads and didn't want to watch anymore. They hoped that the battle in the sky was just a dream. They would rather Qin Hao not be a perfect grade prodigy who was comparable to the Divine Prince and was just an ordinary disciple of the academy. Perhaps that way, Qin Hao would have a chance to survive. Unfortunately, the talent and potential Qin Hao had erupted with was too great. It could be said to be truly immeasurable. He had already stepped onto the path of the Divine King and possessed the glorious capital to become an eternal Divine King. How could Jun Imo allow him to remain? Lucio's glory was due to her talent, but she also died prematurely because of her talent. Lucio was very sad, but Qin Hao was even more pitiful than Lucio. Boom! Powerful flames covered the sky and erupted from Qin Hao's body, completely igniting the floating glass heavenly path into a heavenly fire. He didn't know if he was pitiful, but he would never bow down to Jun Imo. If this was fate, then he would use his fist to punch through fate and walk the path that he controlled. Even if the end was an abyss, he would have no fear and no regrets. Beams of flaming swords flew forward. The sound was sharp, but the momentum was heavy. It was like a meteor of the great path was crazily bombarding, wanting to devour the wildly laughing Jun Imo. Jun Imo floated there with a smile on his face. He just looked at the flaming swords sweeping over. Faintly, he looked at Qin Hao with a touch of admiration. This person not only survived their Tianzhao divine domain, but also stepped onto the divine path again and forged a perfect grade heavenly wheel. The pain and torment in between was not something an ordinary person could endure. Even Jun Imo didn't have the courage to recultivate. From this, it could be seen that this Qin Hao had encountered a great opportunity. Under the tide of fire, the dazzling divine splendor of the heavenly wheel illuminated the sky. The bloodline aura of the divine king suppressed the heavens and the earth. 3 threads that flickered with noble purple gold light patterns were attached to the edge of Junmo's heavenly wheel. At this moment, his aura was domineering and unparalleled. That's it. Bang! Junmo's fist, which was imbued with divine power, scattered the streams of fire in the sky. Beams of flying sword light were easily annihilated by Junmo's fist. Junmo's fist ferociously moved forward, directly piercing through Qin Hao's perfect laws of Tao and smashing into his body. Qin Hao also met with a fist. When the two sides collided, an unparalleled power surged and shook. Divine power that could shatter all Daos invaded the heavenly wheel. With a crack, Qin Hao's fist was deformed and his entire arm was dislocated from the shoulder. Immediately, rays of dazzling golden light erupted from the major acupoints all over his body. A torrential power cleansed his body. In the instant that the 9 Hall's divine power attacked, Qin Hao's dislocated shoulder was directly reconnected to its original position. His deformed fist was also completely repaired. Like a spirit snake, his palm snaked up and wrapped around Junmo's arm. Qin Hao's left hand stabbed out with a golden finger and blasted it at Junmo's chest. That was the location of the source of the divine Tao. But unfortunately, whether it was Dinda's bone-crushing hand or the golden finger, in front of Junmo's perfect grade cultivation of 30,000 years, they were too weak and insignificant. They couldn't be moved at all, nor could they be pierced through. Moreover, Jun Imo was wearing a chaotic divine tool with astonishing defense, the Divine King's armor. Too weak. Jun Imo sneered. Qin Hao's attacks that landed on his body were weak and feeble. He directly reached out with his palm and clasped it on Qin Hao's head. His 5 fingers shot out extremely sharp divine light. His fingers sank into the flesh inch by inch. Qin Hao's protective wheel light was twisted and swayed by Junmo's pinch. The battle god battle body that didn't even have time to manifest was shattered. At this moment, an unbearable cry rang out in the void. Just like Lu Qiu's cry before, it was filled with extreme oppression and powerlessness. Junmo grabbed Qin Hao's head and pounced down from the nine heavens. He crashed into the rooftop, just like how Long Miao almost trampled Huang Dao to death. The rooftop shattered and collapsed. Smoke and dust billowed, and the floating glazed dojo shook. Dong! A muffled sound came from the smoke and dust, mixed with Junmo's strange cry. Then, the two figures that fell into the smoke and dust, one chasing the other, rose into the sky again. Everyone saw in disbelief that the first to jump out was Junmo. His left face was badly mangled and his bones were exposed. He seemed to have been severely injured. Then, Qin Hao also returned to everyone's sight. He slowly floated back and held out his palms. A divine cauldron floated above his palms. One was purple gold and the other was bronze. Both of them were filled with the strong power of divine tools. At the top of his head, blood flowed all over Qin Hao's face. The two divine cauldrons in his hand were tossed into the air. They were surrounded by blood-red devil flames, and they were like two flaming meteors that flew towards Junmo. Junmo was trapped between the two cauldrons, and he was bounced back and forth like a rubber ball, letting out a shrill scream. However, this situation didn't last long. In just a few seconds, a long staff swept out from Junmo's hand. The terrifying staff swallowed the two divine cauldrons. With a crack, one of the cauldrons was destroyed. Countless bronze dust fell from the void. A beam of purple gold light escaped from the staff and drilled into Qin Hao's forehead. The gap is too big. Dragon Lord sighed. God Lu's face was also extremely bitter. Qin Hao had indeed forged a perfect celestial wheel. The vastness of the light was not inferior to Junmo's. The key was that their cultivation was not on the same level. Junmo had 3 lines of celestial wheel and had a 30,000-year perfect divine path. Qin Hao only had 1 line of celestial wheel. How could Qin Hao defeat him? They were both perfect celestial wheels, but their foundation was too different. Whether it was in terms of magical power, body, or divine tool, Qin Hao didn't have the slightest advantage. God Lord of Avicii clenched his fists. He wasn't in the mood to appreciate it. He was now on tenterhooks. His spirit was about to collapse in the battle with Qin Hao. In the Academy's team, Xin was the same. His heart was numb. He naturally knew that the supreme cauldron left by his father was destroyed by Junmo. Xin didn't feel bad about it. He was only worried about whether Qin Hao could survive Junmo's attack. Qin Hao's life was everything in the Kunlun Sea. He was all hope. You are not as good as me in the past. Even if you forged a perfect celestial wheel, you're still not as good as me. An ant will always be an ant. Junmo held the sky splitter in his hand. Qin Hao's entire body was covered in blood, and his heavenly wheel was densely covered in cracks. His weakened aura was far from being able to keep up with Junmo's explosive might. So, he was barely holding on. Tell me, where is Zhanwu? Tell me his whereabouts, and I will grant you a quick death. Junmo held the sky splitter in his hand and approached Qin Hao step by step. The reason why he was defeated in the past was that he didn't understand how difficult it was to deal with the Fleetfoot Steps. The other reason was that he was fighting against 2 enemies. Although Zhanwu's celestial wheel was not as good as his, he had the bloodline of the god of war. His fighting spirit was extremely crazy. He abandoned his 5 senses like a madman. He didn't know pain or even life and only knew how to attack. Qin Hao was very smart. He and Zhanwu complemented each other perfectly. Therefore, Junmo was careless and lost. He was the son of the god of war. He had a perfect celestial wheel. How could he bear to be defeated by 2 incomplete celestial wheels? Today, Qin Hao had to die. Zhanwu could also forget about living. Qin Hao was silent and didn't respond. Perhaps he couldn't survive today's calamity. However, it was wishful thinking for Junmo to find out Zhanwu's whereabouts from him. It seems like you want to experience the feeling of having your bones broken and your soul extracted again. Fine, I will satisfy you. Junmo's eyes became more and more vicious. He poured his divine power into the sky splitter in his hand. He lifted the sky splitter, and the sky was covered by terrifying shadows of the staff. However, at this moment, a dragon's roar that shook the heavens exploded from where Qin Hao was. Shadows of dragons mixed in the sound waves and attacked Junmo. They drilled into his eardrums, consciousness, celestial wheel, and even his 5 senses and 6 senses. They turned into swastikas and wantonly destroyed everything. When Qin Hao let out the dragon's roar, the shadow of a Buddha appeared behind his blood-stained body. It looked solemn and dignified. The Buddha's light shone down and bathed his body, as if it was taking pity on him. Sorrowful dragon roar. It was derived from the supreme technique of the dragon race that was passed down from the 10,000 Saints Dragon Palace. The younger brother of Divine Lord Long Ao had an epiphany and became a Buddha. Thus, the true dragon's roar was tainted with the power of Buddha. 1. The powerful sound waves swept over, and Junmo's mind was instantly shaken. His consciousness was in chaos. The swastikas formed by the shadows of dragons stuck in his flesh and blood, in his celestial wheel, and broke into his will. It was as if they wanted to twist his thoughts and make him give up on killing and become a Buddha. His hand that was holding the sky splitter gradually loosened, and his fighting spirit was greatly weakened. Sword rise. Between heaven and earth, Qin Hao's final voice rang out. He pointed his sword at the sky and released the great path, celestial wheel, to the limit. In a shattered floating glass heavenly path, the sword power of the 3 realms was mobilized, and a heavenly might poured into his body. At this moment, Qin Hao pointed his sword at the sky. Sword lights appeared one by one, and a total of 81 swords lit up. Chapter 2110. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The 81 swords were of different shapes and forms. They clanged and emitted a dazzling glow of the Grand Tao that shot into the sky. Every single sword contained a different sword intent, comprehension, and emotion. It was as if they were 81 completely different life experiences. The vibrating sounds of the swords represented their powerful wills. The dazzling radiance contained boundless sword energy. The deafening sound of the 9 heavens sword waterfall faintly came from the void. The sword will formed by the resonating sounds was even more powerful than Wuck's sword pavilion. The 81 divine swords formed a sword array and flew in front of Qin Hao. This was all he had learned from the academy after coming to the sword world. When the swords gathered together, they finally condensed into a huge beam of sword radiance. This sword would be the strongest sword that would decide the life and death between him and Junmo. Lu Shun and Dragon Master's faces changed. They listened to the sound of swordsmanship and felt the boundless sword will that permeated the air. A sense of pride welled up in them. They looked at Wu Jian, but Wu Jian's eyes were full of sorrow. This sword battle had been planned for thousands of years. During this time, the 3 divine lords of the sword world each defended the sword Tao of their own world. No one was willing to submit to the other. However, they were also confused. They knew that the sword Tao of this generation was incomplete, but they couldn't find the perfect point. They could only think of ways for future generations to compete in the sword Tao and find the final answer. But now, after witnessing Qin Hao's 81 swords and feeling the emotion contained in each sword radiance, the problem that had troubled the 3 divine lords for thousands of years was solved. The answer was clear in their hearts. Qin Hao was the perfect point that they were looking for. He wasn't Lu Qiu, Long Miao, or Loi. Qin Hao was the perfect successor to the will of the Divine King. It would have been great if he had come to the sword world 1,000 years earlier, Lu Shun lamented. 100 years would have been enough. Dragon Master's domineering eyes were also filled with regret. If they had instilled the will of the Divine King of the 3 worlds into Qin Hao 100 years ago, It would have been worth it even if the sword world was destroyed. What a pity. Jun Mo would never give the three divine lords such a chance. He couldn't give Qin Hao any chance to step on the divine king's path. Kill. Qin Hao's sword, art, finger art, translation, art, translation. From a distance, it looked like a beam, sword, chi art translation for Jun Mo. Jun Mo was trapped by the sorrowful dragon roar. His mind was in a mess, and the solemn sound of Buddhist scriptures echoed in his mind. It was as if thousands of monks were sitting around him, chanting scriptures. The majestic Buddhist power was crushing him, trying to redeem him. Godly light erupted from Jun Mo's heart. Through the godly king armor, thousands of rays of light shot out. A boundlessly majestic ancient god was condensed by the rays of light. He stood behind Jun Mo, majestic like a godly king looking down on everything. At this moment, the sorrowful sound of the dragon that troubled Jun Mo was relieved, but the danger of the strong sword chi came at him. Jun Mo swung the sky splitter in his hand, and the way of the heavens seemed to be on the verge of being destroyed. The sky splitter swept through the sword matrix, and the beam of sword brilliance that had condensed into a hole collapsed. Dong! Terrifying noises that sounded like their hearts had been pierced rang out from everyone's chests. The sword cultivators of the three realms saw that Jun Mo had shattered the sword formation with a single strike of his staff. The 81 divine swords flew out in all directions, piercing towards him fiercely from different angles. The world that Jun Mo was in had turned into a sky-covering staff shadow. Clanging sounds of explosions rang out continuously, and every time a sword exploded, it would shatter. Until the 80 divine swords were completely engulfed by the rod shadows. "There's still one last sword," someone in the floating glass arena shouted. Jun Mo broke free from the sorrowful dragon roar and destroyed the 80 swords with one strike of his staff. However, in the end, there was still one sword that he could not block. That sword pierced through the sky-covering staff shadow. It seemed to contain different sword styles, and its attack was unpredictable. Although Jun Mo had noticed it and was able to capture its flight path, he clearly had the ability to block the last sword. However, things did not go as he wished. As a beam of blood-red flame sword light pierced through his head, the last sword pierced through Jun Mo's eye socket and directly pierced through his brain. The noble blood of the divine king gushed out from the tip of the sword that had emerged from the back of his brain. Ah! Jun Mo's shrill cry shook the heavens and earth. Qin Hao defended his spirit and restrained the burning of the precepts of fire. He struck out with his staff and heavily struck Qin Hao, knocking him down from the sky. The sky splitter extended in his hand and struck Qin Hao's body all the way to the floating glass arena. "It's over." The academy disciple Wei closed his eyes in pain. Chu San had done his best to exert the divine king's sword power and sword will that the academy had derived from the ancient illusory realm of the void to the limit, but he was still no match for Jun Mo. It was not that his swordsmanship was weak, but the difference in cultivation. He was weaker than his opponent, who had cultivated the divine path for 20,000 years. Although Qin Hao had lost this battle, it was not considered a defeat. Although Jun Mo had won, he had actually lost. Unfortunately, the world only cared about the results. No one cared about the process. A defeat was a defeat. The voices of praise would only sing the praises of the victor. The battle of the perfect sky wheel was finally over. "No, it's not over yet," Wuk said. His body rose into the air, his feet stepping on the sword lotus of the great path. The sword emblem between his eyebrows flashed. Surrounded by endless sword chi, he rushed toward Jun Mo high in the sky. Swoosh! Another voice sounded from the academy team. It was Loi. Swoosh, swoosh. Li Guangxing and the one-armed Long Miao under the Dragon Master's statue rose into the air at the same time. Together with Wuk and Loi, they formed 4 divine sword radiances and launched an attack on the Tianzhao divine prince. "Those who stand in my way shall die." Jun Mo's eyes had been pierced by the blood flame sword. His face was extremely fearful and ferocious. The sky splitter swept out. before the powerful shadow of the staff wrapped in divine power could hit Wuk and the others. The divine kings might had already dispersed their sword will. Ha! The sword lotus of the great path under Wuk's feet shattered. The frost on Loi's body dissipated. Li Guangxing was caught in the dazzling divine light released by Jun Mo. His neck was twisted and his body seemed to be torn apart. Roar! Long Miao transformed into his true form to block the staff. He was also the only one who broke free from Jun Mo's might. But almost as soon as Long Miao came into contact with the Sky Splitter, his 1,000-foot-long dragon body was directly swept into floating glass city. Countless buildings collapsed. In the end, Long Miao spat out blood. His body twitched weakly, and he fell into the ruins, never to get up again. With one strike, Jun Mo easily crushed the strongest swordsman of the three realms. They didn't even have the honor of taking Jun Mo's Sky Splitter head on. Basically, they were already eliminated before they even met. One could only imagine how terrifying Jun Mo's 30,000 years of perfect divine path strength was. Among them, only Lu Qiucai was lucky enough to clash with Jun Mo. But at that time, Jun Mo's heavenly wheel had not opened, and he was completely in his usual state. Numerous figures from the Academy's team and the Dragon Tribe dashed out crazily towards Wuk and the others who had been scattered. Jun Mo had a blood-red sword stuck in his head. His body was suspended high in the sky, and he didn't even bother to glance at them. In his eyes, Wuk and the others were like useless ants. There was only one figure in his eyes, and that was Qin Hao, who had fallen in the floating glass field. After 20,000 years, the young man from the Honorable Pill tribe who had made him suffer greatly once again injured him. And this time, the injury was even more serious, piercing through one of his eyes. If this matter was spread by Tamanaji, he would definitely become the laughingstock of the circle of divine princes. Go to hell. The Sky Splitter in Jun Mo's hand moved and once again smashed towards the figure who had fallen in the floating glass field. But at this moment, a small figure came through the air and stood between Jun Mo and Qin Hao. It was a woman. She made a seal with her hands, and a dazzling crown flashed out from her body, heading towards the Sky Splitter. The funny thing was that this woman didn't even have a heavenly will on her. She was only at the imperial level. It was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Moon-flowing crown. In the Rikujinji army, next to the young master of the Mu clan, Mu Bai, an old man looked at the dazzling crown and lost his mind. But in an instant, he flew up and protected Xiao Han without any regard for his life. The heavenly wheel bloomed from the old man's body, and one divine pattern after another flashed. There were actually 6 of them. Boom! The mighty Sky Splitter came down and smashed down where Xiao Han was standing. Just when everyone thought she was going to die, a pair of pale hands blocked Jun Mo's crazy attack. Your Royal Highness, please have mercy. Elder Yu's white beard was stained with blood. His palms, which had blocked the Sky Splitter, were cracked, and he trembled violently. Even though he was a 60,000-year divine Tao cultivator, Elder Yu was still injured by 30,000-year perfect divine Tao cultivator. Senior Yu. Mu Bai was astonished. This old man was a guest of the Mu clan and had an unusual status. Why did he intervene? Did he have a death wish by blocking Jun Mo's attack? Who are you? Jun Mo bellowed furiously. The old man knew that Jun Mo was a prince, but he still dared to rush out from the crowd. Clearly, he wasn't a sword cultivator. Ascension Stage, level 97 of the 99th Heaven, a member of the Moonflow clan. This girl is a descendant of the Moonflow clan. Please have mercy on her, Your Royal Highness. Elder Yu tried his best to plead. Blocking the Sky Splitter took a lot out of this 60,000-year divine Tao cultivator. Take her away. Jun Mo bellowed. The Sky Splitter turned into a streak of light and flew back into his hand. Seeing this, Elder Yu's forehead was drenched in cold sweat. He didn't dare to linger and drag Xiao Han away. Xiao Han's face was covered in tears, refusing to leave no matter what. Left with no other choice, Elder Yu knocked Xiao Han out with a palm strike and brought him out of the floating glass Tao arena. Qin Hao lay on the ground. Watching this, his Adam's apple bobbed. He wanted to say something, but all that came out was blood. The old man knew that Xiaohan was from the Divine Dao clan and had saved her. Qin Hao knew that the old man meant no harm. Bastard. Jun Mo's towering figure slowly floated down from the sky. He stepped onto the floating glass field and walked step by step to Qin Hao's side. He raised his hand and grabbed the blood-flame longsword that was stabbed into his eye socket. He pulled it out and punched it into nothingness. When he looked down at Qin Hao, the bloody hole in his left eye was exceptionally terrifying. That's enough. A voice rang out from the floating glass hall. Jun Mo was about to lift Qin Hao up from the ground when he paused and turned to look at the floating glass hall. Divine Master Wujian slowly rose from his throne, and a faint divine light enveloped his body. Although the light wasn't obvious, it gave off an irresistible aura. Then, step by step, Seamless walked toward Qin Hao's position. If you dare move, I'll destroy your Feng Wei divinity right away. Dragon Master saw that Feng Wei was about to move, and his giant dragon head issued a gloomy warning. The words, "destroy the divinity," were like a heavenly scream. Feng Wei's raised foot immediately stopped. Jun Mo stared at Divine Master Wujian. His left eye that had been pierced by Qin Hao's sword slowly burned with the light of flesh and blood. They looked at each other in silence. Jun Mo sneered and said, "You want to protect him? He's a disciple of the college." "Of course, I want to protect him," Divine Master Wujian answered calmly. Hearing this, Jun Mo's smile grew wider. He looked Divine Master Wujian up and down and said, "Do you know the consequences of doing this?" "I know. Wasn't it your highness who caused the Saint Spirit world to float toward the sword world?" Divine Master Wujian said calmly. "You've got guts," Jun Mo said in a low voice. He took 2 steps toward Wujian and said, "Face to face, I'll kill everyone in your divinity. Not even a blade of grass will be left." "Do as you wish, your highness." Divine Master Wujian's eyes were firm. He swore. Chapter 2111. When Qin Hao had the courage to come back and face Jun Mo, he knew what was going to happen to him. At that time, he had secretly sent a voice transmission to Wujian and Xin that no matter what happened to him, they were not to interfere in order to prevent the destruction of the realm. But now, if Wujian did not appear, Qin Hao would definitely die. Besides him, who else could save Qin Hao? Even though Wujian knew that Jun Mo would lead the Tianzhao army to destroy the divine realm, Wujian still did not hesitate, just like Qin Hao when he came back. If the destruction of the Wujian divine realm could save Qin Hao's life, it would be worth it to Wujian. If the Wujian divine realm could be destroyed, the Sword Dao would exist forever. At this moment, Jun Mo stared at Wujian and saw that his determination was unshakable. The burning hole on his face looked even more terrifying. He laughed coldly as he turned his gaze to Tamanaji. The Great Path Sword world had 3 God Master experts, but Jun Mo only brought Feng Wei on this trip. He originally thought that no matter what he did, the people of the Great Path Sword world would not dare to resist. His confidence came from his father, the Tianzhao Divine King. But in the end, Jun Mo miscalculated. The Great Path Sword world really dared to go against his wishes. It was obviously impossible to get rid of Qin Hao with Feng Wei alone. Jun Mo needed someone to help him. If Tamanaji was willing to join forces and send Lord Tianyin to help Feng Wei restrain the 3 strongest God Masters in the Great Path Sword world, then with the abilities of Jun Mo and Tamanaji, even if there were many sword gods here, Jun Mo was confident that he could come and go as he pleased. Tamanaji, Jun Mo shouted to the Divine Prince of the Yun Zhe Divine Realm. "Help me. I, Jun Mo, will owe you a favor." "That's not very good." Tamanaji leaned against the throne and said with a smile, "The godly king's factions could not easily attack the lower worlds. This was the iron rule of the desolate world, a rule set by the current godly kings. Although the Great Dao Sword Realm did not have a Divine King faction backing it up, once the rules were broken, What would happen if the lower realm forces under the jurisdiction of other divine kings wreaked havoc in the Yunzhe divine realm? Should they fight back? Or perhaps divine King Yunzhe would receive the punishment of the divine king and hatefully watch the destruction of the lower realms under him. Rules were rules. Even a divine king could not be lawless. Don't you want to get the reincarnation mirror? Jun Mo shouted. Where is the reincarnation mirror? The smile on Tamanaji's face disappeared. He stood up abruptly, and his face became extremely serious. Seeing this, Jun Mo sneered in his heart. He lowered his head and looked at Qin Hao. He was certain that the item was with Qin Hao. So it's him. Tamanaji saw Jun Mo's expression and instantly understood. His expression gradually turned cold. He said to God Lu and Dragon Master, both of you, the Yunzhe Divine Realm is doing something. Unrelated people should leave. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. Buzz. Monstrous aura erupted from Lord Tianin's body. Turbulent sound, waves intertwined. He reached out a hand and gently pressed on the strings of the guqin. God knows when, but a glowing divine guqin appeared in front of Lord Tianin. It seemed to be an ancient object. Yunzhe Divine Realm had entered the battle. Do you really think there is no one in the Sword Realm? God Lu handed the unconscious Lucio to a commander of the group of 8. His slightly plump body stomped on the ground and floated in the air. As he raised his hand, the void was shrouded in endless sword light. The entire sky of Floating Glass City had completely fallen into a sword world. I haven't fought for a long time. Today, let's exercise my muscles. The Dragon Master's huge dragon claws kneaded his shoulders, and all the joints in his body emitted a terrifying crackling sound. His already huge dragon body stood up, and the pressure he emitted became even stronger. Waves of terrifying dragon roars resounded in the air, as if it was the dragon race's horn to attack. Roar, roar, roar. One by one, the divine dragons transformed into their original forms under the will of the Dragon Lord. Dozens of winding dragon bodies hovered above the experts of the Tianzhou divine domain and the Yunzhe divine realm. At the same time, among the beast army, enormous figures stepped out. Demon birds shrieked, war beasts roared, and strong giants gripped their spiked maces tightly. Their physiques began to rise infinitely. Those who offend the Sword Realm will be killed without mercy. Boom! The hundreds of thousands of swordsmen gathered in the floating glass field spread out. 3 inner and 3 outer layers turned into a sword formation. With God Lu's 8 troops as the main force, the swordsmen of Avicii were scattered. Every small area was mixed with a true dragon and a giant. They surrounded Jun Mo and Tamanaji. At this time, the eyes of the swordsmen of the 3 realms were all red. Impudent! Master Tianin shouted angrily. Her fingers were on the zither strings. Tamanaji waved his hand and stopped her. God Lord Lu, Dragon Master, I don't want to bully you, but this king has something that has been stolen. It is on that brat, and I have to take it. If you want to ignore the living beings of Sword Realm and start a war, this king can only accompany you. What do you mean by steal? I think you two are just twisting words. Come, let's fight. At most, I will kill you 2 brats and bring my descendants back to Myriad Saint Dragon Palace. Let's see what Tianzhou and the Sage King can do to me. Dragon Master seemed to be a natural troublemaker. He was not threatened by Tamanaji at all. He was the Dragon Prince of the Dragon Palace. Later on, he did some rebellious things and came to Sword Realm. He felt that the environment was good, so he stayed here. Sword Realm was not his nest, so he did not care if it was destroyed. Then you can try. Jun Mo roared. He stretched out his arm and held the sky splitter. He swept it towards God, Lord of Ichi. Kill him? He did not believe that Sword Realm had the guts. On the contrary, he could attack the sword cultivators of Sword Realm without any scruples. This was the confidence of a divine king faction. Bang! A hand surging with power grasped the sky splitter. At this moment, a figure stood in front of the Empyrean divine lord like an unshakable mountain. This person had a head of white hair, and his facial features were robust. As he stood there, his entire body exuded a boundless valiance. Martial God. After seeing this figure, the 6 founding elders of the Academy, the 8 divisions of God Lu, and the various beast ancestors all called out. The white-haired expert standing in front of Jun Mo was the first palace sovereign from Divine Wilderness Continent who established the South Pole Divine Palace, Martial Lord Ancestor. Now in Sword Realm, Martial Lord was called Martial God, Divine Lord Realm. Jun Mo's hand holding the Sky Splitter was fiercely shaken away. When Martial God caught it, the rebound force made his entire arm feel like it was broken. At this moment, Jun Mo's expression changed. Sword Realm had more than 3 Divine Lords. There was actually a 4th one. No, the white-haired youth in front of him had not completely cultivated to become a true Divine Lord. He was still lacking something. However, he was already very close to becoming one. Attack! Martial God's white hair fluttered in the wind. His strong facial features made him look like a 16-year-old youth. After leaving Divine Wilderness, he had constantly increased his strength as he wandered the various realms. In terms of appearance, he seemed to be about the same age as Qin Hao. Who are you? Jun Mo's eyes warily looked at the Sky Splitter in Martial God's hand. The divine weapon had fallen into his opponent's hands. He knew very well how powerful the Sky Splitter was. Even he did not dare to take it head-on. Scram! Martial God replied to Jun Mo with a single word. When the sound wave rolled over, it was like a ferocious meteor that ruthlessly smashed into Jun Mo's chest. He was sent flying. The sound of bones cracking came from his dented God King armor. Jun Mo fell heavily outside the floating glass field. The next moment, the Sky Splitter, which had lost its luster, fell from Martial God's hand like a withered branch and was thrown under his nose. Your Royal Highness. Funwei rushed over and helped Jun Mo up from the ground. Jun Mo staggered to his feet and vomited several mouthfuls of blood. Only then did he forcibly suppress the sound wave from his roar. In fact, he had not been seriously injured in the fierce battle with Qin Hao. However, at this moment, the martial god had severely injured him with the word scram. He could not even summon the strength to release the Sky Splitter. Jun Mo glared at martial god's face. Sensing the other party's natural, perfect divine Tao aura, he gritted his teeth and said, "Perfect." This was already the 3rd person in Sword Realm who had forged a perfect Sky Splitter. The first was Wuck, the second was Qin Hao, and the 3rd was this white-haired madman. Sword Realm was not a complete heavenly Tao. How could it have nurtured 3 perfect Sky Splitters? How is that possible? Since when had the perfect Sky Splitter become so casual? Your Royal Highness, we shouldn't stay here any longer. Let's go back. Funwei was on guard against Martial God. God Lu, God Wu Jian, and even Dragon Master, who had been yelling about killing people, did not reveal any killing intent. However, Funwei sensed an extremely strong killing intent from Martial God. He knew that the other party was not joking with Jun Mo and would really kill the son of the Divine King. Wait for me. I'll be back. Jun Mo unwillingly stared at Qin Hao, who was lying behind the god of war, and Wu Jian. He put away the Sky Splitter and turned into a beam of light with Funwei, piercing through the floating glass heavenly way and disappearing into the vast, untainted land. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The experts of the divine realm of Tianzhou, who came with Jun Mo, left floating glass dojo one after another. Everyone, take care of yourselves, Tamanaji said gloomily. He also stared at Qin Hao and left with the experts of the divine realm of Yunza. It was not difficult for God Lu, Wu Jian, and Dragon Master to fight against the 3 divine lords of the Sword Realm. However, if there was one more, it would be too much for Jun Mo and Tamanaji to bear. The martial god's simple grip on the Sky Splitter was enough to let Jun Mo and Tamanaji understand that even if the 2 divine princes worked together, they would not be able to overcome the obstacle, let alone take the reincarnation mirror from Qin Hao. Back then, Jun Mo had returned with injuries all over his body, and had returned empty-handed. What a similar scene it was today. He did not get the reincarnation mirror and was injured all over again. Moreover, his injuries were much more serious than before. The moment he left the Great Path Sword Realm, he was paralyzed next to God, Lord Fenway. "Your Highness!" Fenway was alarmed. His divine power transformed into a dazzling barrier as he gripped Junmo's arm. From the looks of it, Junmo Scram had injured his foundation. "Return to the divine realm of Tianzhou. On my father's orders, summon all the divine lords under his command," Junmo said, his face pale and his voice abnormally weak. "Yes." Fenway glanced back at the starry sky where the three beams of light intersected. He knew that this place was not far from destruction. I didn't want to dismiss the Avicii sword cultivators, but the situation forced me to do so. When he stepped out to protect Qin Hao, he had secretly communicated with God Lu and the Dragon Lord, expressing his attitude. He was willing to use this academy to exchange for Qin Hao's chance to live. "Wu Ji, this old dragon is ashamed of his inferiority." Dragon Master shook his head in shame. "The two of you, please treat the sword cultivators of the endless world well. When the Heavenly Edict army arrives, please remember that no matter what happens to us, do not interfere," Wu Jin said. The price of destroying a world was enough. They could not bury the entire Great Dao Sword Realm. From today onwards, there will be no more Rikugenji, nor will there be any more true Dragon Sword Realm. Sword cultivators do not distinguish between each other. There is only one Sword Realm, God Lu and the Dragon Lords said to each other. Wu Jin smiled, understanding their intentions. Wasn't this the best result of the floating glass sword battle? Although Junmo had brought disaster, he had also helped the sword cultivators of the three realms remove all obstacles. From now on, there would be no more Endless World, no more Rikugenji, and no more true Dragon Sword Realm. There would only be the Sword Realm. "The two of you, thank you." Wu Jin cupped his hands, his gaze seeming to say something to the two God Lords. Then, God Lu and the Dragon Lord's figures disappeared. Only the 6 elders and the 4 big shots of God Realm were left in the Supreme Tower. "I didn't expect that Junmo would actually help you in the battle of the floating glass field," the war god said as he walked out. "Then shouldn't I thank him even more?" Wu Jin looked at the war god, and the two of them simultaneously laughed. Putting aside whether or not they would be able to protect Qin Hao in the end, destroying the academy in exchange for the fusion of the three realms had been worth it. It had been worth it. At this moment, many figures were standing outside the Supreme Tower. Divine Sovereign Danin, the secluded Spring Gate Master, Divine Sovereign Cloudsword, Taoist Xuani, the renowned sword god of the Endless World, and the Sect Master had not left. Although they had dismissed their disciples, they had remained behind, determined to accompany the academy to the end. Xin was here as well. In addition, Elder Yu, who had taken a blow from Junmo's staff and saved Xiao Han, was also in the crowd. This old man stood in front of Qin Hao, looked at Xiao Han, and said, "Come with me. Soon, this place will be reduced to dust. You do not belong to the academy." Xiao Han tightened his grip on Qin Hao's hand, then shook his head at Elder Yu. "Senior, I am indebted to you for saving my life. I had wanted to enter the Divine Tao, then go to the Zenith God realm and step into the 97th layer of heaven to see Divine Lord Moonflow. Alas, I'm afraid I won't have that chance," Qin Hao said. Before he had full confidence, the more heavenly wheels he forged, the easier it would be for the seal to be broken by the divine will. From then on, the second invasion of the outer world would occur. The reason why the martial god ancestor interrupted the divine path was to protect the living beings of the divine dominion. I have always chased after the supreme power. After coming to the sword world, I discovered that this divine world was different from the other worlds. It seemed that the divine will hidden in the heavenly path was stronger, so I stayed here, the martial god said. Why did he challenge the famous sword gods of the three worlds? Because he wanted to become stronger. Only by constantly challenging could he break through himself and find a shortcut to quickly grow from the divine path. He was very clear that the seal of the 14 primordial spirit gods would not last for long. Therefore, before the second invasion of the outer world, the martial god wanted to become as strong as possible, at least to become a divine master. Only then could he be a little relieved. It would not be like the first time when the 14 primordial spirit gods could not protect the heavenly path. Is there any news of Senior Yinming? Qin Hao understood the martial god's original intention. The martial god shook his head and said no news. The 14 primordial spirit gods were older than the martial god ancestor. Yinming used the power of the divine origin of the 14 primordial spirits to set up a protective seal and flew to the untainted land alone. After a long time, the martial god passed the divine test and became the martial god. I wonder how Ancestor Yinming is now. Qin Hao lowered his head. In front of the martial god, he was a junior, but the martial god was Yinming's junior. Probably, Yinming and the martial god were the same. They were also searching for the supreme divine King Dao in the untainted land. For some reason, Qin Hao had a strong expectation of the ancestor Yinming, who he had never met but had left behind a cauldron and a drop of the dragon god's demon blood. If ancestor Yinming was here, maybe the academy situation would not be so bad. Don't think too much. You can't pin your hopes on others. Since you are out of the divine wilderness, you should know how dangerous the untainted land is. The heavenly Tao is different. Gods are like carps crossing the river. They are weak. Tianluan is also weak. The martial god's eyes were shining. He leaned close to Qin Hao's ear and whispered, "Do you know why I can derive 5 divine marks in 20,000 years?" Qin Hao was shocked. He shook his head at the martial god. This was a secret that Qin Hao could not figure out even if he racked his brains. Hee. The martial god laughed in a hoarse voice and said, "In fact, God Lu, Dragon Master, Wu Ji, and many other divine masters in the untainted land more or less know this secret." Chapter 21:14. Divine Lord Tianyin had come a visit. As Tamanaji's subordinate, how could Qin Hao not be surprised to see her in the Supreme Tower? The black robe concealed her aura, and Tianyin smiled when she saw Qin Hao's expression. Although Tamanaji had left the Sword Realm on the day of the floating glass field, Divine Lord Tianyin had returned midway. "Your Excellency, please leave us for a moment." Tianyin turned to Divine Lord Wujian. Seeing his hesitation, she continued, "I wouldn't have come here if I wanted to harm him. Moreover, you and another expert are in the academy. Hurting him won't do me any good. I'll be right outside." Divine Lord Wujian gave Qin Hao a look and stepped out of the Supreme Tower. Then, Divine Lord Tianyin flicked her finger, sending out a Guqin ripple that lingered in the room. After setting up the barrier around Wujian, she had deliberately set up a second Guqin restriction. She was being very careful. "May I ask why Senior Tianyin has come to see me?" Qin Hao asked. After a few moments of silence, Tianyin studied Qin Hao carefully. After a while, she nodded approvingly. "Not bad. Your spiritual energy is perfect and flawless, and your heavenly wheels are of excellent quality. You were able to injure His Royal Highness in a fight. You're very rare for someone of your level. Your future is limitless. Senior, did you come here to praise me?" Qin Hao didn't want to beat around the bush. "You should know that Jun Mo left with hatred in his heart. He won't let you go. His anger will burn down the entire seamless world," said Tianyin. "Senior Wujian has already dismissed the sword cultivators of the domain of the gods." Qin Hao naturally understood. "Dismissed?" Tianyin sneered. "You're not so stupid as to think that they can escape. In this primordial world, as long as the successor of the divine king doesn't transcend the divine Tao, they won't be able to find peace even if they hide at the ends of the world. That's our business. Senior, please speak your mind. If there's a chance, I won't refuse. Given Qin Hao's current situation, he had no way out. As long as someone was willing to help, no matter who it was, even if it was an enemy, it would still be a source of strength. Moreover, Lord Tianyin was relying on Yu Liuji. Junior, you have unlimited potential. His Highness and I both cherish talents. Someone like you shouldn't die under Jun Mo. This small academy can't protect you. If you join the Divine Realm, His Highness you, as the leader, you and the Saint King can protect you. Be there if you join the Divine Realm. Saint, if you... Tianyin seemed to think of something and said euphemistically, "Oh, when you can protect yourself, you can leave His Highness you at any time. The Divine Realm will not restrict you for life." Qin Hao fell silent. His heart was slightly shaken. What Master Tianyin had said was the truth. With Junmo's strength, it wouldn't take much effort to get rid of him. Indeed, Avicii and the martial god wouldn't be able to protect him. However, if a divine prince were to take charge, the result would be completely different. Qin Hao was not afraid of death. He just didn't want to implicate the academy. If Tamanagi came out to protect Qin Hao, it would undoubtedly resolve the crisis of the infinite world. Qin Hao didn't only want to live. What's the condition? Qin Hao asked. Do you need me to give the mirror of samsara to His Highness you? How could Tamanagi help him for no reason? Cherishing talents? It was just an excuse. The perfect heavenly wheel was rare, but the divine realm of Yunza didn't lack people like Qin Hao. Just because of cherishing talents, Tamanagi didn't hesitate to offend Jun Mo and openly challenge the majesty of the divine King Tianzhao. Qin Hao wasn't so naive. He knew the temper of the divine King Tianzhao very well. What happened to him in his first life? As the young master of the divine king's force, Tamanagi certainly knew the other divine kings. He knew what would happen to the divine realm of Yunza if he protected Qin Hao. Cherishing talents was an excuse. Tamanagi's greed for the mirror of samsara was the real reason. Of course, Tianyin smiled and said, "It's not safe for you to keep the mirror of samsara. Only in the hands of His Highness you. The other divine princes won't take it away. A man's wealth is his own ruin. You should understand this simple logic." Sure enough, Qin Hao inwardly gave a sorrowful smile. Tamanagi only wanted the mirror of samsara. In truth, he didn't care about Qin Hao at all. Taking in a deep breath, Qin Hao cupped his hands in apology to Heavenly Note God Lord. This child appreciates Your Highness Yu's kind intentions, but my ancestor and many other seniors have warned me more than once that I am born as a hero with a lofty and unyielding character. Even if I die as a ghost, I will not bend my knees. No matter how many heavenly edict army Lord Mo brings, this child is willing to bear it alone, regardless of life and death. You don't know how to appreciate favors. Tianyin God cursed. If you lose your life, what pride do you have left? I'm afraid that you won't even be able to become a ghost. Respectfully sending Senior off, Qin Hao coldly said, "When Jun Mo comes again, you simply can't imagine the power of the gods under his command." Tianyin God was unwilling to accept this. The Academy's sword has already been sharpened. Qin Hao remained unmoved. "Then wait for your deaths, humph." Tianyin God swung his sleeve and pulled his hood over his head. He swept aside the double barriers of the Supreme Tower and turned into a beam of light that shot into the sky. This child was incurable. Outside the Supreme Tower, God Lord Avicii raised his eyes to look at the void before walking in. "What did he say to you?" "Tianyin means that Tamanagi is willing to protect me," Qin Hao said. God Lord Avicii sneered. "The conditions are quite harsh, aren't they?" Qin Hao slightly shook his head. "They aren't too harsh. They don't want me to serve him as my master and hand over the mirror of samsara. This junior doesn't like to bend the knee to others, but this isn't important. If Tamanagi is sincere, I'm willing to serve the Yun-Zhe divine realm. If you leave, Junmo's anger will burn the Yun-Zhe divine king, and the academy will be fine. God Lord of Ichi knew that Qin Hao wasn't doing this for himself. But Senior Tamanaji is too shrewd. If he isn't sincere, once I hand over the mirror of samsara, will I still be useful? Qin Hao's eyes were filled with worry. Tamanaji was greedy for the chaotic divine artifacts that could increase his cultivation and divine power. It was true that he had a strong background with the support of the Divine King. But what if Junmo started a war regardless of the consequences? Would the Yunzhe divine realm really fight to the death with the Tianzhou army for Qin Hao? The answer was obvious. Tamanaji would definitely hand Qin Hao over to Junmo. This was the reason why Qin Hao didn't agree to God Lord Tiannin's request. Tamanaji was just pretending to be merciful. Moreover, Qin Hao didn't like his life being in the hands of others. He did the right thing. God Lord of Ichi nodded. He could tell from God Lord Tiannin's disguise that Tamanaji truly wanted to help them. He should have let his subordinates pay him a visit openly. How would he hide the head and show the tail? The purpose of this was to fear Junmo. Once he obtained the mirror of samsara, Qin Hao's life would no longer be up to him. Chapter 2115. Wooling Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation 101 was truly willing to help him in this calamity. If Qin Hao wanted to survive, he could only use his hands to tear open a crack in the calamity and grab hold of that glimmer of life. The Academy had no good plan against the incoming Heavenly Edict army, but when the time came, everyone would do their best to open a path for Qin Hao. Only when Qin Hao left with the mirror of samsara would the sword world be safe, and the situation would not continue to escalate and affect God Lu and the Dragon Lord. Another half a month passed. As usual, everyone cultivated and honed their swordsmanship in the Academy. With the help of Divine Lord of Ichi, Qin Hao's celestial wheel healed rapidly, and he had recovered 80 to 90% of his strength. Ever since everyone had returned from Floating Glass City, powerful divine intent auras had started to linger in the void of the divine domain. Junmo had sent people to keep an eye on this place at all times to prevent Sword World from secretly sending Qin Hao out. But Qin Hao had no place to go, so who would dare take him in? Days passed, and the seemingly peaceful academy was invaded by an invisible pressure. The outcome of the contest between the God World and the God King, the master of all worlds, was predestined from the very beginning. Soon, this day finally arrived. At some point, divine light surged in the high skies of the divine domain. The heavenly Tao seemed to have been torn apart by countless terrifying cracks, instantly becoming fragmented and covered in scars. Then, balls of powerful divine light turned into clouds of endless radiance and rushed in one after another, suppressing the sky above the academy. At this moment, the entire sky above the academy seemed to be suffocating. They're here. God Lord of Ichi opened his eyes, and his aura became sharper than ever. He took a step forward, and when he did, he was already floating in the air from the top of the pagoda. Buzz, 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 buzz. Sword light flew out from different corners of the academy, transforming into figures that stood solidly behind Avicii. Sword Lord Gu, Blind Sword Lord, Wind Sword Lord, Grass Sword Lord, Severing Love, 6 Elder Sword Gods. The second strongest in the realm of the gods, Reverend Dongsheng, Reverend Northstar of the Big Dipper Mountain, and Reverend Enliu of the Southern College stood to the side. Supreme God Danin, the sect master of the Nether Springs sect, Supreme God Tingyun, perfected Xuani, and the others stood on the other side. Afterwards, the war god's figure gradually solidified. He stood at the very front with the Empyrean Divine Lord. The two of them looked up at the sky at the same time. Their gazes seemed to pierce through the divine light, piercing through the clouds. Divine Lord of Ichi raised his arm and pointed at the heavenly mandate army floating behind Junimo. I have a sword. Come and fight. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.